we've got a very special episode for you today. It's very experimental. We're going to be working on parched corn, and a very, very important part of living life in the 18th century and even the 17th century. Thanks for joining us today on this episode. Corn was such an important food for the Native Americans and the settlers in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century that we really have to spend a lot of time on it. It is a very, very interesting topic, and corn was prepared and used in so many different ways. Sometimes when it was green, when it first came up, or when it wasn't fully mature, and then when it was ripened and dried. Well, today we're going to be focusing on parched corn, and this particular kind of preparation was so important for long journeys and for storing this food for winter to be used at different times of the year. So this is going to be a lot of fun. There are a number of different descriptions about how parched corn is prepared and a number of different kinds of corns that we are going to be using today. And one of the reasons for this diversity is because this product was made over a long period of time by a lot of different kinds of people. So you can imagine there are many different ways to do it. That's what we're going to have fun with, experimenting with all these different kinds of corn and all these different kinds of preparation methods. I've got some small kerneled popcorn. Popcorn is actually very similar to 18th century corn in that it is a flint corn, and many of the kinds of corns that they had there in the 17th and 18th century, the Native Americans, they had a very small kerneled corn. It was actually sought after. I've got a little bit of, this is hominy corn, actually not made into hominy yet, but made to be turned into hominy. It looks like a bit of a dent corn. It's just a yellow corn, looks very interesting. I've got some hominy here, some dried hominy. That's going to do some very interesting things. And I've got just some straight Indian corn. It's a mix of colors. It looks like a flint corn. It doesn't have any dent in it. That should work well too. Lots of different corns, lots of things to experiment with. Let's get started right now. The first method I'm going to try out here is very, very simple. Kind of reminds me of how we did the roasting the coffee over the open fire. I've got a little frying pan here. I'm just going to start off with my just straight Indian corn, and I'm going to toss it in this frying pan. It's kind of been pre-warmed up. This method really is the most obvious one, but you definitely have to have a certain kind of pan to do it with. This also is only going to work, obviously, with some kinds of corn. So as this starts to warm up and starts to get heated, you want to keep this moving in the pan, and you can start to hear the kernels popping. Now, this isn't like real popcorn. If it was real popcorn, it'd be blowing out of the pan. And that's why for this particular method, I'm not gonna bother to use the actual real popcorn because it would be flying everywhere. But that was one of the things that happened in the 18th century, and one of the reasons why we'll talk about other methods here in a little bit. Okay, most of the kind of popping is done here. And for now, at least, I'm gonna call this batch done. You can see some of it popped like we would expect popcorn to pop. Most of it did not pop, which is fine. That's gonna work out. It's gonna be good too. Next up here, I'm gonna be using some of this dried hominy corn. Pour a batch of this in. Hominy is another method of preparing corn for later use or use at the time. This is corn that's soaked in lye, and it's soaked for a long period of time. This releases the outer husk of the corn, and it also does some other things to it, making it give it a different taste and a different texture. Very good for sort of long-term storage also. Okay, I've got the hominy corn out. In fact, maybe it got just a little more brown, but hey, this is an experiment. We're not sure how anything is going to turn out perfectly. I've got some of this yellow corn. It's a dent corn, and we'll put that in. Some references I've read have talked about have talked about parched corn being basically popcorn, and kind of referring to it as if it popped open a lot. I doubt that was true most of the time. It's hard to say what the moisture content was in any particular person's corn, So some, they might have gotten to a popcorn stage and it popped open rather vigorously, and other times possibly it didn't hardly do anything but just basically crack open. So you might be wondering, so what is the point of doing parched corn? Well, there's a lot more to it than just simply toasting it. We're actually driving out any excess moisture. And another thing that's happening is that we're turning a super hard kernel into something that's much more easily ground up or pounded up with a mortar and pestle. It's also changing the flavors of it. We're changing some of these starches to sugars, and this toasting action is going to give it a completely different flavor than you would expect from just mere cornmeal. So there's many different kinds of things happening. And as we take our parched corn and we grind it up, we're actually going to be taking it and putting it into a much more compact form at the same time. This in turn creates the perfect food, the perfect survival for food, if you will, because it has almost complete nutrition, or at least let's say it's nutritious. Has a lot of energy and packed in for the amount of weight that you get, and it's not in a big bulky form either. So here's where the real experimenting comes in. There's another method for preparing parched corn that when I first read it, I think, okay, this isn't going to work, right? But here, let me read to you. This is a piece out of Benjamin Franklin's piece on, he had a pamphlet basically on maize, right? So here's what he talks about. He says, an iron pot is filled with sand and set on the fire till the sand is very hot. 2 or 3 pounds of grain are then thrown in and well mixed with the sand by stirring. Each grain bursts and throws out a white substance twice its bigness. The sand is separated by a wire sieve and returned into the pot to be heated again, and repeat the operation with fresh grain. Now, I don't know about you, but if it's like real popcorn, you would think all that sand would get mixed in with the popcorn, and the last thing I want to be doing is eating sand. But we're going to try out this method anyway. Let's get working on this sand pot. So as odd as this method may sound, it starts to make sense when you understand what happens when you don't have a lot of materials or a lot of tools to use. This method undoubtedly was used pre-European contact by the Native Americans, when the only vessels they had were simple clay pots that they fashioned themselves. This heats the kernels all the way around all at once. So there's another variation of this pot method. Instead of sand inside of the cast iron pot or the clay pot, you can use salt. And of course, having salt inside of my popped corn that doesn't get loose after you shake it, that sounds a lot more palatable than sand in there. Again, this is in Benjamin Franklin's little maize pamphlet. He says, the sand is separated by a wire sieve and returned into the pot to be heated again and repeat the operation with fresh grain. So, of course, Native Americans may not have had a wire sieve. He talks about using a wire sieve, but here we're using a basket, one of our potato baskets, to use as the sieve portion. If we were doing it the other method, we could try to get all the sand kernels off, and in this case, all the salt kernels off of our corn, although I wouldn't mind leaving a little bit. And here's our final preparation method. This one's probably the strangest one of all, probably the most, I don't know, experimental. We'll see how it turns out. What we're gonna do is, now that I've had the fire going for quite a while, I'm gonna spread out my layer of embers, and then I'm just gonna pour the corn right onto the embers, and we'll see what happens. I have not tried this method before, so it's really an experiment. This is basically the only method if you don't have any utensils with you at all. If you don't have any pots, you don't have any pans, and still you want to cook up this corn to make it so that you can eat it some way, this is going to be the method you use. There we go, here we go. This is our pan. I haven't got it all separated yet, but I've scooped out some of the kernels here, and you can see nice popped kernels are still hot. The embers are still in here. And separating them, that's going to be the hard part with this. We might be able to use a basket when this is completely cooled off, More than likely, we just sort of spread this out on the ground and get the embers away and pick out the little corn kernel pieces. Maybe you would do this on the fire, and you'd put the embers down and you'd put the corn on, and then you would smother the fire. I'm not sure. I've only read a couple of instances of this. It isn't a method as well documented as the other ones, but it certainly looks interesting. I'm not sure if I want to work too hard at picking all these out. It does have another addition, a good thing though, that comes with it, and that is the ashes that get stuck to the corn are actually good for you. When mixed with the corn, they release more nutrients, and so this is actually one of probably the most nutritious ways that we could fix this, if we could separate out, all the charcoal and everything else. Well, there you go. We have parched multiple different kinds of corn using multiple different kinds of methods, and they were all very interesting. The real question now is, how do we prepare this so that we can eat it? How do we make it palatable? And what does it taste like? That's next week's episode. We're gonna have a lot of fun with that, so make sure to tune back in next week when we figure out how to make this into something we can eat. I wanna thank you for coming along with us as we experiment, as we try these things out. How do we rediscover what happened 200-300 years ago with corn? This is so much fun. I want to thank you for coming along as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. In our last episode, we parched corn. We spent time over the fire getting these kernels ready, parching them up. Now we have to prepare them, turn them into something we can actually eat. Thanks for joining us today. Let's hear what Benjamin Franklin has to say about this next step. He says, "That which is parched is pounded into powder in mortars. This being sifted will keep long fit for use. An Indian will travel far and subsist long on a small bag of it, taking only 6 or 8 ounces of it per day mixed with water." So we've got our mortar here, and we need to pound it up into a powder. That's what we're gonna do. Well, let's get to pounding this stuff up. I've got my mortar. Now this one is not as big as they probably typically would have had. I mean, you can imagine a log this big around and maybe this tall and a much bigger stamper. This is a very small version, but it's gonna work nonetheless. Probably a lot more portable. It doesn't really matter. I think all these are probably gonna work very similarly. Let's start out with this. And I'm not gonna fill this cavity up too big, but let's see what happens. Boy, this crushes so easily. This is very brittle stuff. You can start to see it. It only takes a few seconds, and really all the kernels are already broken. If you've ever tried to do this with real corn, you'd know that you'd be pounding on this thing forever to get this to break up. So this makes it so much easier. I didn't notice it before while I was actually making the parched corn, but as soon as you start to break it up, you get this terrific smell. This stuff smells wonderful. As soon as you've got some of it broken down, the real fine stuff is starting to get in the way. So I can actually pour it into our sieve here and then shake out the fine stuff and then put the grit right back in. I'm gonna go ahead and mix up the Indian corn I did earlier along with the yellow corn because they look almost exactly the same once they're parched. I don't think they're gonna have a lot of different flavor. I'm gonna go ahead and keep this hominy separated to see if it has a different flavor, but we're gonna grind it up the same way we did the other. Here are the two bowls. We've got this is the hominy corn, or the actual dried hominy that's pounded up after it was toasted, baked, parched. And here's the standard corn, both the Indian corn and the yellow corn mixed up. And of course, I've got the grits here left over. Now, we're not gonna actually cook these grits, but they would have been prepared by boiling them in water for 2-3 hours, maybe even 4 hours to make a special dish. We don't have time to do that today. Maybe we'll do that in a future episode. But what have we got here? This powdered meal would have been eaten in 3 or 4 different ways, possibly more, but we've got some very simple ways. This would have been taken on the trail. and eaten. Basically, put this in a leather bag, take it along with you. This is all you've got to eat. You'd mix this with water, and we can do that. We can, without even cooking it, take a quantity of this meal. We're gonna put it in a little bowl here and mix it up with an equal quantity of water. Possibly if we're on the trail and we don't want to even start a fire, we can prepare it in this manner and eat it, and it might not be the tastiest thing in the world, but it is sustenance if we have to keep moving. And wow, it looks very palatable, doesn't it? Kind of a cold mush. Now maybe we'd let this set a while to soak up. It doesn't necessarily say that, so I guess we're gonna try it out just like this. Let's give it a try. Definitely an interesting flavor. There's a lot of flavor here. I mean, if you just took straight cornmeal, you probably wouldn't think it tasted like anything. This, in its essence right here, definitely gives you a flavorful feeling. It's sort of like eating solid coffee, or coffee grounds maybe. But maybe, I don't know, I've never eaten coffee grounds, so it has to be much worse than this. But it's got a little bit of a burnt flavor, but that also kind of brings in a saltiness that you wouldn't expect out of something that is totally unseasoned at all. So it's actually got a lot of flavor to it, even in this totally cold sense. Let's try maybe baking it up a little bit, seeing if we can make it a little bit more palatable. So let's try cooking this up. I'm gonna add a little bit of water here to our pan. And we're gonna use the hominy meal this time. Let's stir this up. I don't want to overcook this. It seems to cook up pretty rapidly. Now, if I really wanted this to break down, I'd probably cook this really, really slowly. Maybe I'd take a little brass kettle and make a very porridge out of it. Let's see how warm it is here. Yeah, it's nice and warm. So I didn't necessarily cook it up a whole lot. I just wanted to try this out to see what happens when we get it warm. It did a little bit of cooking here. You could see you don't want to heat this up too quick. Yeah, well, again, it's got a lot of flavor to it. It's bringing a lot of that burnt flavor in. So, depending on the kind of taste you want, you might not want to take your parched corn as far as I did. Many of the corn that I used in this kind of really blackened it up. If you like that kind of burnt popcorn taste, then maybe this is the perfect thing for you. I can tell that it definitely would have a lot of flavor compared to some bland things. Again, this is completely unseasoned. There's definitely a lot of flavor here. Maybe not something that our modern palates are expecting. So not only can we eat this paste either hot or cold, but there's another way we can actually eat this, and that is as a drink. And this is mentioned in multiple different accounts, and specifically the Iroquois had a drink called sagamite, where they would take this same sort of meal and add it to water, where it's mostly water, and let that set like a tea possibly, and then drink the water off of the top of that, leaving the meal behind, maybe even straining it out. So I've let our sagamite, they don't actually know exactly what sagamite was like, but I'm guessing here. Other drinks were exactly the same kind of way. Let's test this out. I've kind of let this steep for a little while, like you would let tea brew, but it's just in room temperature water. Let's find out what it tastes like. Actually, very nice, slightly flavored water. I'm sure that we could probably brew this in a couple of different ways if we wanted to bring out more of the flavor. But if you wanted to give your water something a little extra, maybe it didn't come from the cleanest source, and maybe it's got an off taste to it, this might be a good way to bring some flavor into it and maybe push down the flavors you don't like so much. But there's a lot of different things you can do with this. One of the last ways, at least we're going to try in this episode, is a simple ash cake. We can take our meal, mix it up with a little water into a paste, and cook it right on the coals. Just like we've done ash cakes before. If you're interested in more on ash cakes and different ways of making them, make sure to check back. I'll put a link down in the description section that points to our other ash cake episodes, or at least episode. Okay, here's our ash cake. It's all cooked up, and it's still got some little coals stuck to it. We can just brush that off. It's a little charred around the edges. We can just break that off and mix into a nice little bread, sort of like cornbread. Again, this is completely unflavored with anything, no salt, no nothing. Got a nice texture to it. Got that same kind of flavor, maybe not quite so strong. Actually makes a really good ash cake, depending on how you cook your parched corn. Excellent way to cook it. So there's so many different methods that you can prepare this parched corn and eat it, even in this meal form. So these have been two pretty intense episodes, a lot of information. We did, we parched the corn, then we ground it. We tried different types of cooking methods, different types of corns, and then different kinds of ways to cook it. There's so much to learn about parched corn, and I'm only just skimming the surface. There's more to learn. It's one thing to read it in a book. It's another to actually try it out. We learn so much more when we try these things out rather than just reading it, right? I love this. I want to thank you for coming along as we try these things out, as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. We've got a very, very special episode today. I'm on location at historic Locust Grove, and we're going to do a special episode about these two cakes. Thanks for joining us today on this cooking episode. We're here today at historic Locust Grove. It's located in Louisville, Kentucky, and I've got with me Brian Cushing. He's the director of programs. Amy Liebert, she is...
I am the theatrical director for our first-person interpreters.
That's a lot. And we've got this really interesting story, apparently, about these two very beautiful cakes. But there's a scandal behind these cakes. Give me a little bit of the story.
Well, 1810, the second daughter who grew up here, Eliza Cron, wrote a letter that her sister, Anne, her older sister, had been off at a family wedding, and she actually brought her back some cake. But the thing that she found most amusing about this wedding that her sister had been to was that Cook Robin, an enslaved cook, the letter said that through mistake, she took one of Eliza's aunt's best cakes and left one of the brown sugar cakes that was intended for the enslaved population for the wedding. And this was apparently...
So we have a cake swap.
We have a cake swap. And so our question has been, did these look enough alike to mistake them? Or is this maybe, just kind of...
Yeah,
is it a little bit of passive resistance?
Was it on purpose? Yeah. And so we're going to find out a little bit about these cakes. We're going to have to do a little bit of conjecture, but we definitely have some things we can go on with this. We're not going to cut into these cakes right now. What we're going to do is bake a couple of cakes. And we're going to see what a typical, let's say, late 18th century, early 19th century wedding cake might be like. And we're going to have to do a little guessing about what's happening with this other cake. Let's go to the kitchen. Let's bake some cakes.
Let's get started.
So here we are in the kitchen, and we've got everything to bake these cakes. Let's go through the ingredients. Exactly what do we have here?
Well, we've got the ingredients here for both what would possibly have been one of the best cakes.
Right.
Because the letter talks about Aunt's best cakes. Mm-hmm. So obviously you can see a lot more ingredients over here on this side.
Yeah. So this is the fancy cake.
And this will be our very basic brown sugar cake that possibly might be the kind of thing they would have given to the enslaved workers.
Okay. So what are the ingredients here? Let's see. This is basically a standard great cake from the 18th century. So we've got our separated egg whites. We've got egg yolks. I've got butter and sugar that we're probably going to cream together. We've got flour, What is this? This is brandy. We've got spices that go in
absolutely.
this. So this is cinnamon, but you could put something like nutmeg.
Mace, nutmeg would be great.
Lots of stuff. And then
we've got our sweetmeats.
Yeah, sweetmeats, which are a standard thing you'll see in the grape cakes from this kind of 18th century time period.
And probably one of the first visual cues that this was not the correct cake when you cut it open.
Right, so what do we got over here?
A lot of the same things, a few differences and much simpler. We've got also our separated eggs. We've got our whites and our yolks. And then over here, our butter again, but our brown sugar. And you can see that a lot thicker. It's still got the molasses in it. And of course our flour.
Right. And instead of brandy on this cake, we're using a little bit of straight white whiskey. So what's our first step in construction?
Well, the first thing we want to do is get a little bit dirty here.
Okay.
Because we're going to start creaming our butter.
Okay.
All right, and of course, one of the best ways to do this, especially on a cold day like today, is to just get in there with our hands and cream it up and make it warm.
So we're mixing the sugar and the butter together.
Yeah, we're going to get that sugar in there. So the white sugar over here and our brown sugar over here. And it'll be interesting to see side by side how much easier it might be, or if it doesn't matter, to have the white sugar worked in by hand and this thicker, more molassesy brown sugar. Now, of course, as you guys are seeing, one of the challenges on a cold day like today is not only getting it soft, but keeping it soft. So what we might want to do is actually set these back down by the fire while we go ahead and move on to the next step with our eggs. Next is the really hard part.
Okay.
Because this is a cake that does not use any kind of modern chemical leavening agents. The way that we make it rise is through aerating our eggs as much as possible.
Sounds exciting.
It is. It is exciting. It is going to give us a real workout. So we're each going to pick up a bowl here.
Okay.
And the goal is that we are going to whisk these eggs that we have separated for probably about an hour.
So 5 minutes.
Well, we'll see how they are after 5 minutes.
Okay, an hour. So we have them separated. We have eggs and the yolks separate, but we have to whisk them all.
We do, and we're going to whisk these until they really don't look like the same substance anymore. It's going to be almost like you're making a meringue.
Yeah.
That they will really just fluff up and become this wonderful leavening agent with all of the air bubbles we're going to get in here.
Well, I got a few air bubbles.
Yeah, you do, but you're going to need a lot more.
Okay. I think.
Okay, I think the hard part is over. I think we're there. From here, it will be easier.
Sure. So now that we get these separately whipped.
Now we bring them together. We're going to very delicately fold the yolks into the whites.
Okay, and we're doing our best not to get
we want to save all of these air bubbles because that's our leavening agent.
Okay.
So Brian, if you want to get these yolks in here. Now we're going to go back to the fire and check in on our butter and sugar. Here's our white sugar and our brown sugar. And the last thing we probably want to do is just whip the sugar a little bit before we mix them together to get a little more air in there.
Okay. So we're going to figure out how to get these eggs folded into this butter concoction. Wow.
And once again, we want to be very careful and very delicate. Which really makes you think about how many people might have been working in a kitchen like this. Especially for these big recipes that call for so many eggs, so much flour for these great cakes.
And now
the flour.
Now the flour.
Next
so
up.
This goes in a little bit at a time.
Yeah, we keep just this process of trying to very gently fold it in.
Okay.
All right, while we're mixing this up, we've forgotten one very important ingredient.
Okay.
And that is our brandy.
Oh, yeah.
So let's go ahead and add this in right now.
Okay, I'll add this in. And I've got rose water. This goes in too?
Absolutely, because you are making the best cake.
Okay, and how much rose water?
Usually calls for about a gill, which is about the same as 4 ounces.
Okay.
So that's going to be it for this simple brown sugar cake over here. But of course, for the best cake, we have a lot more wonderful ingredients to add.
Okay.
So we've got our cinnamon, and then we've also got these wonderful sweetmeats that we're going to add in there. So today we've got some apricots and some raisins that are going to go in as well.
Okay.
From here, they just go into the hoops and into the oven.
Well, we've got some hoops here. These are our wooden hoops, And we've got these lined with paper, right?
Absolutely.
This is parchment paper. You can see they're all buttered on the inside. If you want a little bit more information about prepping these kinds of hoops for a cake like this, you can go to our 12th night cake episode, and we spend a lot of time talking about exactly how to get these hoops prepped with the paper, or else your cake is going to stick to it and everything else. So we just get this batter into these, and then they're ready to go into the oven.
In it
right?
goes.
Okay.
So if you're doing this at home, you're going to want to set your oven to about 350 degrees and bake it for about 2 hours.
Okay, so these cakes are ready to go in the oven, right?
Let's get them in the oven. Let's
Okay,
go.
Let's go. These guys baked up. You can see they look great. Kevin actually did some magic and iced these up because I am not an icing master. But you can see what happens if these are both iced. One of these is the special cake, right?
Right.
One of them is the one with all the sweetmeats and wonderful white sugar and who knows what. And the other one is our brown sugar cake. And if they're done like this,
The only difference I'm seeing is a little bit more height on this one.
well, each one comes out different.
Right,
so-
yeah.
And she even didn't it sort of imply there were more than one best
Exactly.
cakes?
Yeah, it was
Right.
one of the best cakes.
Right.
That she took. Yeah.
So, I mean, every cake's a little bit different. So, we don't know at this point which one's which. If these were brought to the table at some feast or meal, obviously we would have a hard time figuring out which was which. Now, Kevin knows which one's which. If these were brought to the table, everybody's
Right.
thinking, hey, it's normal, looks
Yeah.
like a cake, right?
Absolutely.
And then, hey, we're gonna serve it to the guest, and whoa!
Something's wrong.
So let's cut in. I'll let you cut that one.
Thank you.
And we're gonna cut into this and see what we've got.
Oh, I was
look at
wrong.
that, look at that.
So was I.
Gorgeous.
Wow, look at that. And there they are.
Oh my goodness.
Well, wow. These cakes look amazing. I mean, there's differences. What do you think?
Well, obviously we've got the sweetmeats in one, but you can also see the difference in the color of the sugar.
Oh,
So you can see how this blender got discovered. And it's important to realize we haven't tasted these yet, that so much of this is the status of the white sugar.
Oh, yeah.
Because when we were researching this, we went through Diderot's encyclopedia, and sugar refining then and now is about separating the molasses out of the sugar crystals.
Yeah.
So the brown sugar that still had molasses in it was less processed, less expensive, and not quite the status symbol. So I'm imagining poor Mrs. Gwathmey, who was meaning to serve this very important,
Right.
elegant
Yeah.
cake to her friends.
I want to say too, if we haven't already, we had some great research partners from Colonial
Yes.
Williamsburg and Plymouth Plantation and Alfam, all kind of helped us on this journey to discover what 18th century brown sugar was.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Kimberly Costa at Colonial Williamsburg, who works in foodways, very much held our hands through this process.
Kathleen Wall was a friend at Plymouth that really kind of helped us through this.
Right. Anytime you have these little mysteries,
Right.
They take a lot of digging. A lot of people you really got to connect with to keep teasing out these concepts and what the real differences were like. I say, let's taste them.
Let's do it.
All right. I'm starting with the brown sugar.
Let's start with the white one.
Oh, that's good.
Right off the bat, I'm picking up the rose water and the brandy that went into the white one.
The brown one is good,
It's very good.
but I mean, it is just consistently, kind of plainish.
The white one is definitely very special.
That is very special. The brandy in there. Mm-hmm. But I also feel like we might appreciate the brown sugar one more now. This is the sort of thing I could see getting at a coffee shop or something. Probably paying a lot of money for. Because we're not as obsessed with the color for the status anymore.
Right.
Well, and unfortunately, fruited cakes like these great cakes from the 18th and early 19th century, everyone relates them with fruit cakes.
Right.
And fruit cakes are, for us, relegated to a particular season of the year, and generally people make fun of fruit cakes and they're all bad, and this is wonderful. Well, this has been a really exciting episode, and I think there's if you want a little bit more story about what is going on with the building of these cakes, we're going to try to do a little bit more in-depth where we just basically talk about the process that we went through on coming up with the cakes, the research they had, the research we brought along with us about how we were going to build these cakes. It was an adventure.
Absolutely.
We spent a long time on this episode, and it was quite an adventure. So if you want to hear that, I don't know if that episode is going to come out right away or in a couple of days, probably in a couple of days. Watch for that. That's going to be a longer, in-depth episode where we talk about the process that we went through just to make this episode. I really want to thank Brian and Amy for bringing this particular story to this series. It was a special story, one that has a lot to it, a lot of components that we had to work out, and more to sort of discover than your standard recipe. So it was a lot of fun, and they taste wonderful. So thank you so much for inviting us, bringing this wonderful episode, and helping, of course. I couldn't have made these cakes without you. And Kevin for doing the icing. I wasn't going to do that. And they had to be iced.
Absolutely, because otherwise it would have been so much easier to tell the difference. You can see those raisins and apricots coming right up out of the top.
Well, and this really shows, I think how this could really have been an honest mistake.
Yeah. So we'll cover that more in depth in the next episode. Thank you so much for coming along with us as we experiment with these things, as we actually sort of discover. We're doing sort of live archaeology with cooking. It's a fun thing. And I want to thank you for joining us, for sharing this with us as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th and early 19th century. Hello, I'm John Townsend. I've got with me Brian Cushing, and we're at the site of historic Locust Grove in Louisville, Kentucky. And give me just a little bit of background about this house.
Well, the house was, the property was saved in the first place because this was the last home of George Rogers Clark, Revolutionary War hero out in this region. It actually belonged to Major William Cron, who was married to Clark's little sister Lucy. And he came here later on in his life when he was no longer able to take care of himself. So we've got 55 acres left of the original farm that was 694.5 acres. So that's still quite a bit of space to play with as a historic site goes. And we've got the historic home that, as far as we know, we think they started building it in 1792, probably moved in around 1795. And so this is original. Another really exciting thing we have here is reconstructed outbuildings. And so they've been reconstructed in the way that they were done 200 years ago, but farming had changed an awful lot between the time that William Cron was here and the county got the property. So those had to be reconstructed on the sites of the original outbuildings, and they all work. So we're able to go out into these buildings and to experiment with the way life worked 200 years ago.
So tell us about the newest of your reconstructed building projects you're working on.
Well, that is our small farm distillery.
Really?
So yeah, it's important to we're not actually we're not actually making whiskey at this point. We're all about educating about small farm distilling in the early 19th century, and this was another aspect of the farm economy. So it was grain processing. It was fruit processing. William Cron had a mill, so we really weren't surprised when we found out that he had been a part of a still purchase also, and he also had orchards. In those days, we think of whiskey and brandy as a complete luxury now, but without processing and turning those crops into something that wouldn't spoil, that could be stored without spoiling, then you risked, losing that crop as far as any payoff went to it.
So a distillery was an important part of a farm or plantation like this one during this time period.
Exactly, yeah. And one distillery, one small farm distillery like this might have served other smaller farms around. Other people might have come here to use the distillery the same way they might have come here to use the mill. So these things all play into each other, and that's what we've really been trying to push with this project. Not that it's just really cool that we've got a distillery, but the way that this distillery played into the whole farm economy in the early 19th century. And so what we were producing here, it was a small still. The record said between 64 and 66 gallons. And so it really wasn't producing a yield that would be not something that you would put into a barrel. And barrel aging wasn't even something that was as common then as it is now. So what you would get is That's it.
Wow.
That's the whiskey. And again, that's not something that we produce. We're not doing that at this point. But there are some of the distilleries here in Kentucky are doing white whiskey again now. And it's with a bourbon grain bill. So, So they have, there's regulations that say what bourbon is. We were pre-bourbon. So we're brewing, we're distilling with a lot of the same components, the rye and the corn, but we're not making bourbon. We're just making white Kentucky whiskey. Whiskey making, start to finish, it starts with our boiler tub filled with water. It's got to be heated. It doesn't have to be quite too boiling, but pretty close. It's a big copper vat that holds the quantity of water that we need to make the whiskey mash, which is what will be fermented and then distilled. We're really not going to be mashing a whole lot more than 50 gallons at a time. So next we're going to go to our barrel that will be used for mashing. We're going to start with some of that hot water in the barrel, and then we are going to add some of our corn to that, and we're going to soak that corn. And it's almost like if you've ever made gravy, it's kind of like starting out that gravy process. And so we're going to get that good and soaked, and then we're going to start from there to gradually add continuously water and grain. Hopefully we can get that mixed really well with as few lumps as possible. We're going to combine those gradually and continue to stir until the grain and the water are pretty much spent. It has to get down to around 150 degrees. That's going to be a process of waiting and also a process of stirring. We'll incorporate our mash rakes, and so it's got to cool down to the point that we can introduce the malt. The enzymes in the malt, when exposed to that temperature of water, will convert the starch to sugar, and that will be what really spurs along our fermentation. So once we get to that point, we can add the malt, but the mash still has to come down in temperature, and the absolute highest we can do the next step is 95 degrees. It optimally should be lower than that, but at that point, that's when we can introduce our yeast. It's in a liquid form, not a powdered form like you might see from the brew store today, and the yeast is what will act with the malt, which has now had its starches converted into fermentable sugar, and with all that other stuff, it'll start to eat that sugar and produce alcohol. We're talking about 3 to 5 days, and the mash will be ready to go. You don't want to go a whole lot beyond that, or the mash could start to spoil. At that point, the mash goes from the barrel to the still. The top part of the still, which we call the onion, is removed from the still at this point, and just like we bucketed water from the boiler tub to the barrel, we now bucket the mash from the barrel to the still. And it's just a matter of dipping the mash out and pouring it into the top of the still until every drop of that mash has been used. After all of the mash has gone into the still, we fix the onion to the top of the still. So it's over top of the mash that we've just put in. Then the arm that you see coming off of the onion attaches to the worm. And so what's going to happen next is we are going to build a fire underneath of the still so that the mash is heated to the point that the alcohol starts to evaporate, but the trick is that we don't burn the mash itself, and that was one of the hazards of distilling this way. If we do everything right, the mash will start to cook, the alcohol will start to evaporate in the top, and it'll start to run down the arm of the onion to the worm. There's 3 different phases of that distillate that comes out. You've got heads, hearts, and tails. The heads and the tails are toxic, and they have an off taste to them, so you want to get rid of those. And you can tell by the smell, you can tell by the taste as it comes off of the still. So ideally, you want to discard the heads, keep the hearts, which is the good part, and then discard the tails. So we've collected our distillate now. It's not going to be barreled. This would be stored in jugs just because of the small quantity that's coming off of the still. Now, it's not moonshine. This is not illegal. This is just new make white whiskey.
So thank you for that explanation. So in connection with this commerce, this area specifically, or let's say the land behind the Appalachian Mountains, making whiskey, the commercial connection, and what's happening with the Whiskey Rebellion? Can you give me that and kind of...
Yeah, just in a nutshell. During George Washington's administration, they passed a whiskey tax, and this was something that was not well received by people who were producing whiskey. And the difference in the way you got to look at it, we look at it as a luxury item. This is something we use recreationally. Not that they didn't use it recreationally, but this was this was this was making the most of your crops. So if you couldn't make whiskey out of your grain, you're going to lose any potential to make any revenue, to get any return on that crop. And so especially after we had just fought a war for independence that seemed to be tied up in British taxation, a lot of people didn't take kindly to this. So Washington, I believe, was the one sitting president who led troops in the field during this time, and luckily it didn't turn into a full-scale conflict, a full-scale civil war. So you get down to Locust Grove a few years later, and William Cron out here is faced with the same issue as far as making the most of his crops, and also if anybody's paying for the use of his mill in grain. If he doesn't turn that into whiskey, something that can be stored without spoiling, then he's not going to get any return off of that crop. So luckily for William Cron, that tax had been repealed, and so he didn't have to deal with it. Our whiskey probably wasn't seeing the East Coast. It probably didn't make it that far. And again, like I say, this was not being put into barrels and turned into, the brown product that we're so familiar with today, but later on with shipping Kentucky whiskey down to New Orleans, and it's spending time in barrels, and there's a whole other longer explanation that goes into that, but ultimately the result of this experimentation with this wonderful whiskey with Kentucky water and corn and rye, we would get the delightful product that we know today as bourbon.
Thanks again, Brian. This is so fascinating, coming right here to Locust Grove here in Louisville, Kentucky. If you're in this area or you're traveling through this area, make sure to come and visit this amazing site. They've got great events, such a great staff, and they really want to interact with you. So if you're in this area, make sure to stop by. And I want to thank you for coming along with us. We're understanding history. We're connecting it with people and what's really going on. So I want to thank you for all your support, and thanks for watching. We've got a very special episode for you today. We're here at historic Locust Grove, and I have with me Steve Thomas, and we're going to be actually preparing a couple of dishes. We've got peas and bacon and Scotch collops. This looks really good. Thanks for joining us today on this cooking episode. Steve, can you tell me a little bit about what kind of dishes we've got here?
Well, the Scotch collops are a classic old dish that come back from any place English speaking near as we can tell. Collops are what we call now cube steaks. They cook them, especially in the farmsteads, a little differently though. They're cooked in gravy for a long time. And it's a little different. Maybe, our grandmothers did it that way.
Right.
But not too much the way it's done today. If it's veal, they're called collops or veal collops. But if you find maybe that it's time to take one of the older animals and they're a little tougher, then we're going to make Scotch collops. And that's beef that's highly tenderized. So the second dish we're going to prepare is one of the staple dishes of certainly Virginia, as this was part of Virginia, as well as anything south. And it's yellow split peas with bacon. Very little seasoning. We'll put a little thyme, we'll put a little pepper in it, a little salt, but otherwise it's the peas and the bacon. It's a main dish or a wonderful side dish.
Wonderful. How do we get started?
Well, I think the best thing for you to do, if you will manage the peas for us,
Okay.
there's some jowl bacon that's been smoked and cured, and if you could fry that in that Dutch oven back there, we'll start rendering that down a little bit, and then as soon as it's almost crispy, but it doesn't have to be,
Right.
we'll put the peas in, adjust the water, and away we go. What we're doing here, we take these beef steaks, so we're going to cut this into manageable pieces, both from the standpoint of serving to a lot of the farm hands and the kids, as well as how it fits in a pot. I am using a cut of round straight through the thigh of the animal, and traditionally those can be a little tough depending on how you cook it, and that's why we're tenderizing it, and that's why it's going to be delicious. Our next step for us here is to go ahead and flour the collops very lightly. I'm going to grate a nutmeg into the egg wash, a little bit of salt, and a reasonable amount of pepper. Okay,
I like pepper.
We all love pepper, and the more the merrier. They used much more pepper back then than they're going to in the future. John, that looks marvelous. It's just perfect. You're a natural. All right, excellent. Well, now the next step is to go ahead and get the peas in. The peas were soaked in cold fresh water last night,
Right.
and they've been rinsed, and then fresh water's in there again. We may need to add a little more,
Okay.
but it's time to go into the pot. And once we get the water leveled up just to the top of the peas, we'll put some thyme from the gardens.
Since these herbs are nicely dried, I'll just shake these over the top of the pot.
We'll get some butter in our pan. Right, don't crowd these in the pan. They can touch, but they can't lay over the top of one another. And we're going to keep an eye on it. We're going to fry them very gently. We're going to watch very carefully and make sure that they don't overcook by the top of it cooking before it's turned over. These collops are nice and light and white, and they look great. So now we're going to make the gravy.
So how does this gravy go together?
Well, we're going to put a little more butter in the pan because that kind of went away as we fried.
The pan you already cooked in, right?
The pan we already cooked in. We're going to add a little flour. We're going to stir that around. And once that's nice and incorporated and getting a little caramel color, we add a little sack to the roux to finish deglazing the pan, as it's called. We add stock then, a fine, rich beef stock made from boiled down bones and scraps of beef. And you put just enough in to make a nice, not too thick, just right gravy. John, I'd like you to add the mushrooms. Once those are added, we'll add the collops. And then we'll build our fire up. We'll bring it up to a steady simmer. And that's where we'll keep it for 20 minutes, and then we'll check for tenderness.
Okay, that's ready and cooking. You've added sack here, and we get a lot of questions about sack. Tell me about sack.
Sack is a sherry. That's a British colonial term for a dry sherry that was long aged. And that was the most common of all wines during colonial times, because only the big boys could afford the nice French and Italian wines in bottles. Bottles were heavy, they're more expensive. The bottles would have cost more than the sack. Sack was inexpensive and it was fortified, 17% alcohol like a sherry, and so what happens is that it doesn't spoil. And so
Long age,
so in the 6 or 7 months it takes a sailing ship to make an entire route. By the time it gets up to Boston, by the time it gets up to St. John's, you know, it's good, but it has aged more. So you go from flavors of a light sherry of apple and lemon peel and white spice. Now you have butterscotch and caramel and brown sugar and oak, kind of like a bourbon from its aging and sloshing and heat all along the trip.
That's interesting. So you obviously know a lot about sack. Tell me about why you are knowledgeable about sack.
We make this sack at our winery in Madison, Indiana. And we even go so far as to slosh it around because we want it to be just like it was back in the old days. We appreciate period foods, period beverages, and so we have a nice fun period package here for our sack.
What's the name of your winery?
The Thomas Family Winery.
And it's in Madison, Indiana?
In Madison, Indiana.
Wow. We'll try to put a link down in the description section so you can go check this website out. It sounds really fun, and people are always asking about sack. Do you offer sack?
We offer sack. We offer sack. We've been making it since 2005, and it's been very successful. And we have dinners around a good bottle of sack with very Spanish and colonial foods, good savory things, just like we're cooking here.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that little tidbit with it.
Our pleasure.
Everybody wants that information.
Well, you know where to send them.
This looks amazing, Steve. Absolutely. And the smells are wonderful.
I hope it tastes, sir, as good as it looks. And it's for you a fine young sack. And I hope it's a fine accompaniment to this farmstead meal.
Absolutely.
Let's go ahead and try this out. Yes.
See ya.
Yes.
Here's to an early spring.
Very nice.
Wonderful.
So Steve, tell me about the salad and...
The Crowan family would plant lamb's lettuce or mosh in the fall, and it was one of the first greens to come up in their garden. And so when it got about this big in early March, like right now, it makes for a very perfect salad, very tender, very sweet. And one of the Welshmen taught the family how to make this fine dressing. It is buttermilk, mustard, honey, salt, and pepper. Fairly simple, but we're still using it way in the future.
It's wonderful.
It's delicious.
Delightful.
Of course, your collops, very nice and tender, have some wonderful flavor. I love the gravy in there, the mushrooms.
Well, I hope they softened up nicely. It felt like wonderful beef, but you never know.
Now, do you think that mushrooms now are the same that they were at the time, or have those changed?
Would they be different? Yes. One of the things that I have seen is that the indigenous or the wild version of everything is smaller and more intensely flavored.
We've been working pretty hard out here the past couple of days, and I would say this is the perfect payoff to the whole end of the experience that we've had out here.
We got some wonderful flavors. We got some amazing scents, and the whole thing goes together so well. And the colors worked out too.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it, but this is a farmstead meal. This is a very simple dish. I mean, these are our greens we picked, and these are peas that we picked last year and let them dry, and that's our beef, and it's our pork.
Very good.
And there's nothing like eating your own food.
Absolutely.
A toast to Locust Grove.
Here.
Here, here.
And all the people that worked so hard for them.
This has been such an amazing episode. Steve brought us so many amazing dishes, and we got to cook them all, and even brought us a salad. We don't usually get to do a meal. This is so much fun, and truly the flavors and the aromas, and savoring these wonderful, wonderful dishes. It's an amazing thing, and this whole experience of coming to historic Locust Grove again. I can't say enough how, if you're in this area or you come to this area, make sure to visit this site. It is incredible. And I want to thank everyone for, coming along with this, and you coming along with us as we experiment, as we savor these flavors and the aromas of the 18th and 19th century. Hi, I'm John Townsend, and we've got a very special episode today. We're on location at historic Locust Grove. I've got with me Hannah Zimmerman, and we're going to be talking about butter. Thanks for joining us today. Hannah, how long have you been here at this location working for the site?
Oh, well, I started as an intern about 3.5 years ago, and I was instructed to research 18th and 19th century dairy practices so we could reinterpret our dairy building here on site. And after I graduated from graduate school, I came back and I've been here ever since.
Wow, that sounds like a great topic and a lot of fun, and it's probably a very deep topic.
So much fun, so deep. I now am colloquially known amongst non-Locust Grove friends as the Dairy Girl. It's kind of transcended my whole personality, and it's really wonderful, and I love it. I love everything about 18th and 19th century dairy.
Well, it gives you an identity that sticks here with the site. You're always doing the same thing.
Sticks like butter to the bottom of the churn.
So dairy is a big topic. Today we're kind of focusing in on butter. Before we get to butter, though, tell me about dairy. What's the root here?
Okay, so dairy comes from the Middle English word dairy, D-E-I-E-R-I-E.
Wait, how was that again?
It's okay. It's basically, and it means a place of woman's work. So dairies are going to traditionally be a place where women are going to take something, cream and milk, and turn it into something else, butter and cheese.
So maybe I'm not invited though?
You're not invited into my dairy. I'm so sorry. That's probably why we're filming in the kitchen. There's actually a 1750s source that talks about how men only bring dust into dairies. So they should not be allowed, because dairies are supposed to be really, really clean. You're gonna wash the dairy and all its utensils and clean it out before, during, and after your work in the building.
If you don't, it's a stinky place because milk absorbs all the different odors of working.
It's also going to be a really cool place, and I mean that in the terms of interesting and temperature. So you're going to keep it about 10 to 15 degrees lower than your outside temperature, about 55 degrees on average, depending on where you are. They also need to be really tranquil, really peaceful. They're a calm space because if you work too quickly, the butter could curdle, the milk could just go sour. You really want to make sure that you're always working with purpose and practicality in the dairy.
Sounds like it's got a lot of interesting folklore that connects with it. Calm, don't make the butter when you're angry, or whatever.
It does. Well, also, you always want to have calm cows. A happy, well-fed cow will give you the best milk. And the same goes for dairies. As long as you treat the cream gently, you're going to have really, really good butter. And hopefully I've been treating this cream really gently today.
And there's one other thing I've noticed about dairies.
Sure.
In a lot of locations, they aren't it's not beautiful, it's not painted.
Sure.
Tell me about dairies and why they always seem to be white.
Why are dairies white? Well, number one, it's the color of milk, and so of course we like that association, but the most important purpose is that white absorbs odor. So you're going to treat the walls with an ochre or a lime to help absorb the different odors so you don't get all of the associated smells of cooking. If you have a smokehouse nearby, you want the dairy door to be as far away from the smokehouse door as possible so you don't get any of the cross smoking and
We don't want
cross
smoked
ventilation.
cheese.
You
or
don't want
smoked
smoked cheese. I mean,
butter.
maybe you do. But you want to give the butter a chance first.
Right. So let's talk about butter. What's
Great.
the process with butter? Because everybody loves butter.
Okay, well the process for making butter all starts with the cow. You're only going to get milk from a cow that has recently had a calf. So basically the spring and the summer are really when you're gonna get the most milk from your cows. Once you milk your cows, you will take that milk to the dairy. There you will strain it. So straining the milk gets out all the hairs, any dirt or leaves or bugs that may have fallen into it. Once you've strained the milk, then you will pour them into setting dishes. So they have flat bottoms or a little wider on the top, relatively shallow. And these setting dishes, also called panchins, will allow the milk to settle, cool off a little bit from that inside of the warm cow, and it will allow the cream to rise from the top.
Rising cream.
Rising cream, the cream of the crop. So the cream rises to the top, and that's the fat molecules from the milk. So we can skim off the cream, and we're not really going to churn every day in the 19th century. We're going to be churning when we have enough cream to churn. This is a relatively small churn that we're using today, but larger churns, they need a lot more cream. This is only about a quart of cream. So once you have the cream, you can gather that, allow it to set a little bit, and you want it to get it to about room temperature. Room temperature is really the best. You can churn with colder milk or colder cream, but it will take longer. Room temperature cream is going to be the best temperature. And then you pour it into the churn, and then you wait for the butter to come. It's a process you can't really rush. It's a process that takes some time and some patience. Not a lot of practice to pull a plunger up and down, but it is going to take a little bit of time.
So you can't just speed up and
you can't
make
just
it happen.
you can't just speed it up. I could move my arm a little faster, but it's not going to make the butter come faster.
See,
It depends on temperature.
I think this is why men don't make butter.
That's exactly right. And also it can be social. You and I are sitting here talking in the kitchen because you're not allowed in my dairy, but I could sit in my dairy if I wanted to. I could sit in the kitchen or I could sit on the porch. I could do this wherever I wanted. I could walk around churning with my little arm tabletop churn. But it really takes a little bit of patience because I'm going to be doing this until I have butter. And then the process is relatively simple after that.
Okay. So how do we know we have butter?
All right, so we have a little bit of butter right now. You can see it just there.
Okay.
So we're getting some, but we know we have butter when it forms a ball at the bottom of the churn.
So it starts to feel like clunky.
And starts to feel pretty clunky. It gets harder to churn. We get the butter at the very bottom, and everything else in the churn is the buttermilk. So we'll pour off the buttermilk, and then we can use it, we can drink it, we can cook with it, we can throw it away if it's not to our tastes.
Maybe we'd feed it to the hogs.
You can feed it to the hogs. There's lots of uses for buttermilk. And then you have a ball of butter. You'll scrape that out and mold it into cheesecloth. So you'll gather it up into cheesecloth into a ball.
Okay.
And then over another dish, you will squeeze out all of the excess buttermilk that hasn't quite separated from the butter. So you're basically getting all of the water out of the butter. Once you have as much buttermilk as you can possibly squeeze out of the butter, we will rinse the butter. We'll take some cold water, kind of shock its system a little bit, and rinse off any of the excess buttermilk on the outside, any excess butter fat that didn't quite make butter, and any just getting it as clean as possible. This is going back to the idea of cleanliness.
Do we work through it, or what's
We
going on
can
with
squeeze
that?
it a little bit to work through it, and we can reform the butter into a ball as many times as we deem necessary. I like to do this with my hands, but you can also use tools called butter paddles. They look like big spatulas, big wooden spatulas, and you can use that to shape the butter. Once you've rinsed the butter, the only thing left to do is to salt the butter. And you can salt it to your taste, but it's going to act as a preservative. A lot of salt is going to be preferable because we're going to be storing this butter for a while. We're not going to eat it all in one day. We're going to eat it over the course of several weeks. We could even sell it. Months. We could even sell it if we wanted to. And if we don't really like really salty butter when we bring it to the table or bring it to cook, we can rinse that salt out of the butter just the way we did before, and then we'll re-salt it before we put it back into storage.
Okay, so we're like cutting it up or squishing it?
We're gonna squish it. We're gonna kind of mold it like bread dough in our hands. I like to get butter all over salt all over my hands and just work it into the butter really well. You can also
So that's
just
how
coat.
that's how you put salt into the butter.
Sure, you're gonna.
So when you're taking it out,
you're gonna coat it on the outside. So you're gonna rinse the butter again, getting out anything that's
Okay.
possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see how if you're rinsing the butter and the salt, of course, obviously the oils, the butter isn't going to go away with the water, but the salt will go into the water and then you can wash
Right,
it.
you'll salt it to taste a little bit, and then you will salt the outside of it, much like you would salt pork. You know, you're gonna coat the
Right.
entire outside, and it's gonna act as a really great preservative. But please don't bring my salt pork anywhere near my butter.
Those two don't go together.
They do go together once they're finished, but whilst pork is being smoked, I don't want it anywhere near there because that pork smell will get into my butter.
Yeah, you don't want butter that's got off flavors.
Bacon butter is not to my taste, no.
There you go. Well, we've got the finished products here, butter and buttermilk. It's obviously time to find out whether she did a good job making this butter and whether it's actually edible. Anyway, let me
Right,
give
there you
a
go.
little piece of this butter a try. And this is the salted butter or the unsalted
This is
butter?
salted.
That is tremendous butter. I would use that any day on my table. And it's got some, probably a little richer than your typical butter that we get today at the grocery store.
Absolutely.
Buttermilk. You know, in the past, you know, when I was a child, I was never fond of buttermilk. But I think there's a problem with that.
Sure.
That buttermilk that we get today is not the buttermilk that they had in the 19th century or the 18th century. It was something different, right? They're emulating an aged buttermilk that's been cultured. In fact, it also says cultured buttermilk. This is fresh buttermilk,
This
right?
is fresh buttermilk.
Totally different.
Just squeezed out of this ball of butter.
Let's give it a try.
How's it taste?
Like, I don't know, skim milk. Tastes great.
It tastes a lot like skim milk.
Wonderful flavor. So I would drink this all day long. Although I like whole milk myself. But I would drink this all day long. I wouldn't be a complainy child like I was back in all those years ago. Amazing flavors. And all this knowledge, I want to thank you for sharing this
Thank you. You're
incredible
welcome.
knowledge and really giving us the deep down history about what's going on with butter and how this all interacts with, you know, a farm like this. And the stories have been great, and the whole process is really fascinating. So thank you so much for giving us.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Oh, ouch. That one was difficult. I really want to.
It's been a delight.
I really want to thank everyone here at historic Locust Grove. This is an amazing site down here in Louisville, Kentucky. If you get a chance, if you're anywhere in the area, I would certainly look this site up. The house is amazing. The outbuildings, the programs that go on here, they have events throughout the year.
Absolutely.
Also, you can check out their social media site. You can go to their website. A fascinating place with a fascinating history. I want to thank you for coming along with us as we experiment, as we really dig down into these topics, whether it's food or other topics. You know, we're really kind of trying to tease out what daily life was really like for people 150 years ago, 200 years ago, and even longer. This is so amazing. Thank you for joining us today as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. We're here today for a very special episode. We're here at historic Locust Grove down in Louisville, Kentucky. I've got with me Brian Cushing, the program director, and we're doing a cooking episode. What are we cooking today?
We are cooking fried oysters.
Sounds great. Thanks for joining us today. So, fried oysters. How do we get started with doing fried oysters?
This is about as easy as you can get as far as an authentic period recipe. This comes out of Amelia Simmons, and it's a recipe to dress fish, and which they also reference as oysters being qualified as that.
Right.
So it's really easy. These are our oysters as if we were on the East Coast,
Right.
like they just came out of the sea. We are using shucked oysters.
And now we've got just some egg yolk here and a mixture of some flour and some crumbs of some bread that we baked in here a couple of days ago.
So what kind of ratio do we have here with breadcrumbs to flour? Is it just
There's no stated ratio, you just kind of eyeball it,
so
as
the
far as I
recipe
can
was
tell.
just-
Right, yeah. So I'm sure you refine it over time, but this is based on what I did last time. This seems like it'll work pretty well.
good?
I'm gonna get a nice big juicy one here, so there we go.
Oh, that looks wonderful.
And like I say, the directions, they said to brush the egg yolk, but I find it easier just to dredge it in there. So we've got him all sticky with the egg yolk. We're gonna toss him in this mixture, and then he's gonna sit over on the plate for a couple of minutes and let that kind of all take hold on him.
That smells wonderful.
And there we have it.
And these guys are ready for the frying pan?
They are.
Okay,
So we'll get the
let's
frying pan
see
ready.
what we can do. So now we're gonna fry these up in a pan of hot butter.
Amelia Simmons lays these instructions out for fish in general. So some other kind of fish that you might prefer, that you might have on hand, might be a more appetizing option for some of the guys out in camp trying to recreate a period recipe.
Well, they look good. Did we try these guys out?
I think the time has come.
I've never had oysters before, or at least fried oysters quite like this. So I'm gonna pick that one. Whoa, this is bigger than I thought. Okay. Hey, you know, there's a lot of saltiness here. No wonder the batter's not salted.
Yeah.
'Cause they come in salty already. So oysters are one of those things. Even though I'm not that familiar with them because, of course, we're in the middle of Indiana. Oysters in the 18th century and the 19th century were just an amazingly popular, inexpensive for some product that you're going to find all over. I mean, whether it's in England or in North America, there's a lot of industry built around oysters, even the shells, right?
Yes.
So they would take and they would burn the shells and they would make limestone. Yeah, here's some shells. They'd burn those shells up. They would make lime from them, quick lime, and then they would slake that lime and use it for multiple different purposes. It is an amazing product, and eaten lots. You see a lot of them in the cookbooks.
Absolutely.
So what's the connection though with, I mean, here we are in Louisville, Kentucky.
Right.
What's the connection that oysters have with this location?
Well, they were wildly popular in the East along the coast, and they packed them in kegs and shipped them down to these areas. And so one of the first reasons why we thought to do this for one of these cooking videos is there is the owner of Locust Grove, William Cron, in his account book, he bought a keg in 1815. And then his son, John, later on when he owned the house, he also owned Mammoth Cave, south of here, and he liked oysters so much he would have kegs of oysters shipped down there to him at Mammoth Cave. So we just really couldn't resist working with oysters.
So they brought oysters in multiple times.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
they came kegs, you
Kegs.
say?
Yeah, small kegs, maybe. So not too dissimilar
So
from that.
probably salted?
Could have been salted. They worked with ice some. They did pack them in ice, and there was they could seal them with wax, also to try to keep them fresh. They lived through it, as far as we can tell.
Really? So they had these live oysters later on.
Well, they weren't live. Yeah, a lot of times they would even shuck them on the coast before they kegged them.
Okay. So it was sort of like a pickling these guys and then shipping them inland.
Right.
Well, Brian, I've had a great day. We had a lot of fun cooking these and some other dishes. Thank you so much for inviting us and bringing us into the kitchen. This has been a blast.
Thank you guys for coming out. This has been a blast, and it's been fun bringing the place to life with you.
Wonderful. I want to thank everyone out there, too, for all your amazing support, your wonderful comments, supporting us on Patreon or going to our website. I want to thank you for everything you do, and thanks for watching. Hi, I'm John Townsend, and with me today I've got a special guest, Michael Dragoo. He's brought with us a series of egg recipes. They sound really good. Today what are we doing today?
Spinach and eggs.
It sounds really great. Thanks for joining us today on 18th Century Cooking. So Michael, where does this recipe come from?
This is from an 1806 recipe from Maria Rundell in her cookbook, A New System of Domestic Cookery.
Okay, so Michael, what's the first step with this recipe?
we're going to introduce some spinach leaves and some gravy into the fry pan.
Okay.
John, this is so easy. I'm just going to put my spinach leaves into a hot skillet, add gravy, and stir until the spinach starts to wilt. In preparing the gravy, I had a couple of choices. One was just a thin gravy that would have been the drippings from a piece of meat being cooked, and the other was a thickened gravy, almost like we do today. I used some beef bouillon, some drippings, and I used onions, allspice, some mushrooms. It's very much like a mushroom ketchup, almost. I thickened it with some corn flour. I prefer that over wheat flour. It's a little sweeter tasting. That was it. And the finishing touch will be a poached egg. I'm going to prepare them in an 18th century manner by breaking my egg into the teacup and then gently pouring that into my simmering water. In preparation for these recipes, I didn't realize there were so many types of eggs. They were coming from chicken and geese, guinea fowl, turkeys, and so that kind of explains in these earlier recipes why they aren't saying how many. They weren't sure what kind of fowl you were using. And it was up to you to decide if it was going to be 2 turkey eggs or 4 chicken eggs. Something I found peculiar, a thread of continuity through these recipes, is there's very little, if any, seasoning in the eggs. These sauces were meant to support or complement the main dish. The main dish's seasonings were to seize the day, not have these things be overly spiced. To consume them by themselves, they're rather bland, and in a couple of cases, I don't care for them. But when they're put together with the main dish, they're great. They really add something to it.
Wow, it smells wonderful. Hey, let's try it out. Well, obviously gravy's killer, but spinach got a great little easy to eat texture. It is not overpowering.
Nope.
So many people complain about spinach. There's nothing to complain about here.
As soon as it starts to wilt, I pull it off. I don't cook it too long.
The egg, of course, again, and it looked beautiful. It smells beautiful, and a great little dish. Now, this is a combination of dishes, right? The poached egg recipe, and then you put it with...
Her poached egg recipe suggests eating it with spinach.
Right.
So I used her
spinach
French version of cooking spinach, which is not boiling in water. It's frying it in gravy.
Yeah.
So
wow.
Can't go wrong with gravy or eggs. And it's the only way I like spinach. So.
This isn't necessarily a breakfast dish.
Nope.
You can eat this anytime. Tremendous flavors, very simple. It did not take very long at all.
No.
Wow. Excellent, excellent, excellent. I don't know what to say, but Michael,
you
thank you.
keep talking because I'm eating.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing this set of recipes in. Again, poached eggs on top of spinach, cooked the French way.
Yep.
Very, very excellent. Again, we're experimenting. We're smelling these things. We're trying them out. We're tasting them. It is amazing. And I want to thank you for coming along as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. So, eggs and tomatoes. Where does this recipe come from, Michael?
This is a Mary Randolph recipe from a Virginia housewife from 1824.
Tomatoes. Normally, in the 18th century cooking, we don't have tomatoes. Now, we're in 1824.
Spain is eating tomatoes. Italy
Right.
is eating tomatoes.
Right.
We don't embrace tomatoes until... We don't see them in print until early 1800s, yes.
Right, so this is probably one of the first kind of recipes we see printed with tomatoes, at least here in this country.
She uses it in several occasions, yes.
Wonderful. What are we going to need for ingredients on this one?
This is pretty simple. We have butter, onions, skinned tomatoes, and then eggs.
So what's the first step on this recipe?
The first step is to just peel the tomatoes. It's a simple process. You introduce them in the boiling water for no more than a minute. Pull them out, the skin will have generally cracked, and you just simply peel them. Some people will put them in an ice bath, which makes it a little easier to handle, but it's the same outcome occurs.
Okay, so to recap, exactly what do we have here?
We have 2 raw eggs, some skinned tomatoes, raw onion, butter, salt and pepper.
And we're going to take this out and cook it.
That's it.
Okay.
Yep. This is a very simple recipe. I'm just going to introduce some butter into my pan and start to sweat My onions. I'm gonna cook them down until they're about half translucent. Then I add the tomato, and this is gonna be a matter of taste, but you can just warm it through, or you can cook it down until it's broken down more. I add salt and pepper, and finally we crack in a couple of eggs. The recipe says to stir them briskly. So it's almost like scrambled eggs, except you don't whip them ahead of time. And here we are.
Hey, it looks, well, I don't know if it's the most appetizing looking thing in the world, but they look
tastes
great.
I love these.
So let's find out what they
Right.
taste like.
Very good.
Whoa, wonderful
I know.
flavors.
It's wonderful.
It is a great one. Nice, though, all that buttery flavor in there. The eggs, the tomatoes.
Yep.
Excellent, excellent
Yep.
one. And this one was from 1824, where we get to see the tomatoes in these kind of early American recipes. Tremendous flavor.
very good.
Thank you so much, Michael,
sure.
for
Thank
bringing
you.
this one. This one would be a good one to try at home if you're looking to get some of these real kind of flavors
Yep.
right out of the 18th, right out of the 19th century. Excellent one. This one's easy. You'll love it. Thank you so much for joining us as we experiment, as we taste and we smell, as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century.
Hi, I'm John Townsend, and I want to invite you to this very special series of videos. We're here at Mount Vernon, the home of General George and Martha Washington, right here in Northern Virginia. I'm right here on the beautiful Potomac River. We have this amazing house behind us and all these wonderful historic buildings, and we'll be exploring some foods that likely would have been eaten here and on the grounds at different places. This is going to be so much fun. I really want to invite you to come along and experience this. Come on. Hello, Deb. You are Deb Colburn. And what's your title?
I'm the interpretive program supervisor for historic trades,
For
John.
Historic Trades. This is wonderful. We're going to be doing a lot of cooking this weekend, right?
We sure are.
Or this week. But not as much cooking as would normally go on here.
That's correct.
Tell me about this.
Absolutely. So in Washington's lifetime here at Mount Vernon, this is fishing season. So this is when 1 million to 1.5 million shad herring are being harvested out of the river every spring during a 6-week period. And that is a time when Washington is calling for all hands on deck, literally bringing slaves out of their regular duties, not just field hands, but his blacksmiths, his carpenters, his spinners, his dairymaids, his house servants. And so as a result, they're working round the clock while the fish are running. Washington wants those nets out there. These people are not going to be going back to their homes to prepare their meals for themselves the way they normally do. The cookeries at the fisheries are going to be providing these non-stop, constant, cycle around the clock meals for the slaves on a large scale because of how many mouths there were to feed.
And there are multiple fisheries right here in the location.
There were 9 miles of coastline here at Mount Vernon, Washington has. So he's got 3 different fisheries on each poignant part of the coastline, located at 3 different farms.
And how many, you said, how many fish was that again?
1 million to 1.5 million
And these are big fish.
shad herring. This is a shad
How
herring.
much is it going to weigh?
I think this one in particular was about a 20-pounder.
I can't, that is hard to fathom. And this is all hand processed fish at the time, and they're doing this within a 6-week period.
6-week period. Now the salting is happening at the same time as well. So not just the fresh fish is being prepared, but the main purpose for these fisheries is Washington's export business of salt fish herring down to the West Indies, and to produce enough salt fish to give each of his working slaves 5 ounces of salt fish every day, 365 days out of the year.
It's an incredible process. I'm sure it must have been amazing to watch it going on.
Well, we can only imagine, and the documentation that we have, of course, can bring up vivid imagery of what was going on.
Wow. So how do we get started with this guy?
Okay, well first we have to clean him. And
Okay.
so what that entails basically is scaling him. So removing any of the scales that will come off with the scraping of the knife. Now they're silvery, and what's fun about these fish is that they were incredibly visible, not just because of their quantity in the river, but the amount of
So brilliant.
yeah, just brilliant and shining in the sunlight. So here we go. So basically taking off the majority of the excess scales and then moving from the scaling into cutting its head off.
Okay. We don't need that.
Nope, we don't need the head. Although they probably were saving this to put in soups, fish head soup. I would have been able to get some nutrients out of that, and one more
Maybe
thing
we'll do that
to
some
feed.
other day.
Other day. I'm not as interested in it myself. He's a big one, so just keep working our way through here.
Without cutting yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
And then we're going to get rid of all the stuff on the inside that we don't need. Focus on
The actual meat.
the actual meat portion. And so then the next thing that happens is you have to cut through so that you can splay it open like I've done with this one here.
Right.
And that's, it's called butterflying it,
Basically separating the ribs from the spine.
in order to get one whole side to lay flat. There we go. All right. That's a much happier one. Now I'm just gonna dip her into my wash tub
Okay.
so that I can get the last of the mess off. Now we're gonna season them.
Okay, seasoning.
Seasoning. So the kinds of things that would have been very readily accessible are gonna be cayenne pepper.
Okay.
Lots of different hot, spicy peppers according to our records here at Mount
Really?
Vernon that Washington is growing. He's experimenting with all different kinds, fish peppers, bird peppers, cayenne.
That's amazing.
Isn't it incredible?
I really wouldn't have guessed that.
So those do well by them. They've also got black peppers, and the other seasoning that I'm going to use today is, oh, I didn't want to neglect my other one that's not quite so pretty, but still going to taste just fine. I've also have some salt and some rosemary and dried thyme. Now they're using Portuguese salt.
That's interesting.
Isn't it? Isn't
Yeah.
it? Now, so Washington is choosing Portuguese salt because it's best for the salting of the fish that he needs to ship and to preserve for long periods of
Sure.
time. And that's his preferred. He's always complaining about when he has difficulty getting it and looking for it. And we are, it seems to me and to the majority of the historians here that the salt that they're going to be using for cooking with is probably the same salt they're salting with at the fisheries anyway.
Yeah, sure.
Because
Right.
you got barrels and barrels of it.
Why would you use something else?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And again, this is just dried rosemary,
Oh, yes.
some thyme, some of your more traditional savory spices. So at this point, this is your planked or ready to plank shad.
Okay.
And we'll be attaching it to the plank with nails and basically nailing it into the plank from the top.
Okay.
And that way the fire will be able to roast the inner meaty portion of the fish. Yeah.
So this is our planking station, right?
That's right.
Where we can build a fire, but right now we don't have a fire. We're just gonna, how do we do this?
Well, we're gonna mount the fish on the plank.
Okay.
So what I'm gonna need you to do is hold it in place for me about there.
Okay.
While I get my nails. And it's super simple. You just basically push it right through the flesh, but up in a nice strong area that's gonna hold the whole weight of the fish. That's one.
Okay. And it doesn't get any nails or anything down here?
Nope, it's just gonna dangle
Okay,
free.
it's just gonna dangle.
Dangle free.
Okay.
All right, we got that one there, beautiful. And so you can imagine on a really big scale operation how large this plank wall would be and how many fish you're gonna be attaching to it regularly. And basically once you get your nails in place, you can just slide the fish off later on and slide the fish right back over the same nails. So you're not having to re-nail every single time.
So,
I think that's gonna do it.
and that there they are.
There they are. Now we build our fire in front.
And we'll just have a low fire right there.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Deborah, these have been on for
About an hour.
about an hour. How do you know when they're done, other
Well-
than maybe by looks?
Well, by looks, but also traditionally, you
Uh-huh.
know, just like you do anything else you're checking at your oven at home, you're going
Right.
to poke them. You're going to feel what that flesh feels like. You're going
Right.
to take a peek on the inside, and I see nice cooked fish there.
Right. So it's like flaky, it's white, it's not that red translucent color.
Exactly.
Okay, and so, and you haven't turned this or anything. It's
Nope.
just, there it is.
There it is,
Okay.
roasted right in front of the open fire.
And how do we get it off of there?
We're going to slide it right off of these handy dandy nails
And not drop it in the fire.
and not drop it in the fire or catch that tail on
and
fire.
it holds together really well,
Doesn't
maybe with
it?
all that fish skin and everything.
Yep, but look how flaky it wants to peel
That
off
is, that
already.
looks amazing. There's the fish. You've separated some of it out for us. Obviously, we've got some bone issues we have to deal with, right? You've got
Yes.
two different kinds of like these big, easy to see bones
Yes.
that seem to be fairly easy to separate. And then along this back edge, these little hair-like bones.
They're very, very tiny, but they actually, basically you could even chew them up and digest them. We don't
Yeah.
like to, so I
Right.
try to
so we separate
remove
them
them out as
But they're
much
not
as
terrible.
possible.
They're not
No,
terribly different.
no.
Okay. Well, I'm ready to give it a try. It looks good. It smells good.
See what you think.
It's got a wonderful texture. It's not too soft, not too hard. It's not a different, you know, you would think it might be easy to overcook this and make it, you'd ruin it. But I mean, it's like a plank by the fire. You did a perfect job
Thank you, John.
getting this off before when it was supposed to. Or maybe it, I mean, is it easy?
I think that basically fish cooks itself as long as you put heat in front of it.
There we go.
It's just not letting it go too long.
Okay.
And being sure that unless you know, are of a sushi generation, that it's not too undercooked. And
Right.
so basically though, that just comes with experience. You start to tell what, as you mentioned before, what it looks like, whether
Yeah.
it's too translucent
The right
or not.
texture,
The right
yeah,
texture,
yeah.
absolutely right.
Right. And it's got a wonderful smoky flavor to it. It's got the amazing spices that you put on there.
It's one of my favorite things to cook this time of year because I love imagining what it must have been like to lay out a whole table worth of these planked fish
Right.
and having everybody together in a
Yeah.
very unusual setting, just diving in and getting sustenance and enjoying the first fresh catch of the season. It's just not a usual activity here at Mount Vernon except during fishing season.
Right. And it was an all you could eat probably situation. As much as you want, we've got all, just go out and catch some more.
That's right, that's right.
Well, amazing flavors. What do you think for the flavors? What would you?
I'm very happy. Sometimes I leave off the cayenne and I go more with a rosemary, thyme, heavy, you know,
Right.
in that savory direction. But I like it both ways.
It is really, really wonderful. Thank you for bringing this one to us, showing us all of this really, really interesting information.
Well, thank you, John, for coming here and letting us host you and be a part of it.
I want to thank everyone out there for coming along with us as we experiment with this. This is an amazing site. If you're ever in this Northern Virginia area, George Washington's Mount Vernon, this living history site with the mansions and the buildings and the people doing things and the historic trades. There is so much to see, so much to learn. It is truly an amazing site. It is a gem. You have to come here. I want to thank you for coming along with us and experiencing in any way you can, savoring along with us the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. What an amazing, beautiful view. We're right here on the Potomac River, right at historic Mount Vernon, the home of General George and Martha Washington. We've got a great episode for you today. This one again has to deal with the fisheries, one of the most important parts of what's happening here on the estate. This episode is a special one. It has to do with what happens during this giant fish catching operation that they have. This one's got a great recipe. You're going to enjoy it. Let's experience this one. So good morning, Deborah.
Good morning, John.
We did planked shad yesterday. It was amazing.
Wonderful tasting. That was a lot of fun, and I've never done planked shad before, that's for sure. What have we got today?
Catfish stew.
Catfish stew. So how does this relate to the shad?
Well, it's part of the meals that we believe were prepared for the slaves during the fishing season at those fisheries. It's an easy, throw it all together into one pot, let it simmer for a long time, just keep replenishing it, adding to it.
Right.
Would have been a great way to service a lot of people.
Did they catch the catfish at the same time?
Yeah, the catfish are bottom feeders, so they're going to be coming up from the bottom in the nets when they're bringing in all those shads.
So they're netting and then are getting that at the same time.
Exactly.
They're a throw-off fish. They probably couldn't preserve them the same way.
No.
So let's eat them right away.
Exactly.
Oh,
exactly.
perfect. So
it's a really simple recipe. It starts with your catfish.
one just like this one, right?
Yeah, just like that one there. Isn't
Okay.
he cute? Yeah.
He's a wonderful guy.
So it would start with your catfish, and then of course you're gonna have to clean that, fillet it, and chop it up into bits. Season that catfish up the way you'd want your stew to taste.
And this one is spiced up, right?
It is spicy.
Okay.
Now the amount of spice I put into it is because of its relation to the fishery cooking that we're talking about. You're gonna see spices in the English European diet at this point already here in the colonies, but you're going to see more hot spice happening in the enslaved people's cooking.
Okay.
Especially when they're cooking for themselves.
So, besides the catfish, what do we need in our catfish stew?
Okay, well the first thing you're going to start with is your fat of choice. For the slaves, it would have been either lard or fatback, which they did have access to.
Okay.
They're not going to have those Virginia hams, but the fatback's something that is going to get spared to the slaves.
Okay.
So that's your fat that you start with. That's going to melt in the bottom of your pot. Then you're going to add your spring onions.
Nice onion flavor.
That's right. Soften those up a bit, and then from there you're going to cover the catfish will go in next with your spring onions in that fat, and then cover that with water.
Right.
So you've got a nice soupy base happening.
Right.
From that point, you can start to add your root vegetables, which is what we're going to use this time of year in this particular dish because it's a fishing
Leftover
season.
in the spring, right?
March, and April. So we've got our sweet potatoes.
Sweet potatoes.
And our regular potatoes.
Right.
And then when you feel like your stew's getting close to being done, that's when you can add whatever seasonal fresh greens you've already got poking up. And turnip greens were plentiful here at Mount Vernon.
Wonderful. So I guess it's time to put these in the pot, right?
Let's do it.
Okay.
So John, first we're going to put this lard in, the fat.
Okay.
And get that melted up. There we go. And you can go ahead and put the spring onions in.
We got our onions, right?
Yeah. Yeah, those are sizzling up nicely. That's a nice preheated pot, making us happy. I say you can go ahead and put that yummy fish in. I'm going to add the water now. And if you want to give that another good stir, and now we have our sweet potatoes.
Okay, you want the sweet potatoes?
In the pot, absolutely.
There we are.
And the regular potatoes, and now, since the last ingredient doesn't go in until we're ready to almost take it off the pot, the greens, we want to have them wilt towards the end. Give that another good stir. We'll put the lid on, and then in another, really the beautiful thing about this is it's only going to take as long as it takes those potatoes to soften up, because the catfish doesn't take long to cook up at all.
So 30, 45 minutes, we'll come back?
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
Wonderful, we'll come back then.
Sounds good.
So this has been on the fire for 45 minutes and it's ready to check. Wow, it's really cooking up.
It sure is. Looks like everything's nice and soft in there. Our sweet potatoes are the ones that are going to take the longest, and they're clearly done. So
it's basically ready for the greens.
Ready for the greens.
Okay. And this could have been any spring greens that were available.
Absolutely right.
Perfect.
We're just going to let those wilt up, and I'm actually going to go ahead, since the fire is so hot and
take it off now.
So hot,
right.
I'm going to slide this over.
Okay.
Just a little bit.
And it only just needs a minute or two?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's ready to go just like that, and we can take it to the table?
We sure can.
Wonderful. Well, this stew looks so wonderful. It's got a wonderful smell to it. It's got these crazy, colors and textures in it. I'm ready to give it a try. I'm hungry.
Okay, good. I hope you enjoy.
Let me get a piece of the catfish. Not overdone at all. Still holding together well. Wonderful, wonderful flavors.
Well, I'm so glad that you're enjoying it.
And you wouldn't want to go too much farther before some of these things start to fall apart. But it didn't take very long to cook, really.
No, not at all. In fact, that's what's so nice about cooking over the hot 18th century hearth fire, because I think people are always amazed at how quickly things do cook, but we really have the ability to get that fire good and hot.
Right.
And really get to those root vegetables much faster than most people anticipate.
And those nice big thick iron pots really, hold that heat, and they distribute it so well.
It's true. Now, this was the seasonal version of catfish because of this catfish stew because of this time of year. But if you were making this later in the season, you could use okra, tomatoes. You could substitute what you're putting in. The basic, it's soup with catfish, and then add what you will.
Add whatever you've got, whatever you like.
That's right. That's right.
And you could make an upper version of this, a more expensive version?
You certainly could. You could turn this into a chowder very easily by adding a roll of, literally a ball of butter rolled in flour.
Yep.
You take a little bit of your broth out of the catfish stew into a smaller pipkin or a smaller vessel. So it's hot, and you're dissolving that butter and that flour tempering it into that. You could add a little cream to make it even richer, and then once that's been tempered, that goes back into the pot, and that'll thicken up in no time, and you've got a chowder.
Wow. That sounds wonderful, but that would be a higher class version of the same thing. Tremendous. Thank you so much for bringing this one and showing it to me and everyone out there. It's so tremendous to hear about these things, but not just to hear about them or just to read about them, but to try them, to smell them, to do them. That's what is so tremendous about what's, being able to do this. So thank you so much.
Oh, John, thank you for coming to Mount Vernon and letting us host you and feed you.
It is wonderful. I really want to thank everyone here. It's an amazing location, an amazing experience to come here. And I just am so excited about, really interacting with this whole situation. I really want to invite anyone, if you're ever in this area, come to Mount Vernon. You need to see this. You need to experience this in any way possible. And I want to thank you for coming along in this video as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. Hi, I'm John Townsend, and I want to welcome you to another very special episode that we're doing here at Mount Vernon, the home of General George and Martha Washington. This is a special episode. Come on, let's experience this one. So thank you for inviting me in. This is such an interesting place. Tell me about the cabin.
Oh, well, this here is where me and my children live.
Okay.
Joe, my husband, he comes down on Saturday nights. He gets to spend that time with us. But other than that, he's up working at Mansion House.
Okay.
Yes, it's a right nice place, I'd imagine. A nice kick-away fireplace, make sure that we don't all catch our death in here and set everything on fire. It's a good space.
It is warm.
Nice and clean.
What we've got here is catfish. We've had a lot of fish when we've been here so far. Is fish something really common?
Yes, sir. Master Washington gets a good amount of his income from fishing out there in that Potomac River. Sure does, since thousands of barrels of salted fish are places abroad and right here, feed slave population here and feed slave populations other places. Yes, fish is right plentiful and common, and it's absolutely free.
So we've got a catfish here, but what do we have to do to get it ready for cooking?
Oh, well, you clean it and gut it and all that. And then you fillet it up nice and get rid of most of the bones you can. Well, you can cook the whole thing all together, but I like to have mine nice and filleted.
Okay.
And then you're going to season it with your peppers and your salt and your black pepper, and then run it through some cornmeal. Got some cornmeal here.
Right.
And then you're going to cook it right on over the flame.
fry it right up.
Yes, sir. It's right nice.
So how can I help you?
All right then. Well, let's go ahead and get started. We gonna move you out the way. You're not getting cooked today. Sit you right on over here. Get myself a bowl, and then what I'm gonna need you to do is scoop a couple of that cornmeal right off in there. Now this is white cornmeal. It's nice and good, wonderfully ground, nice and fine. And then we have our spices here. We have some salt, of course, very important, some black peppers, and cayenne pepper. This is what they look like before. They's all crushed up, mortar and pestle and the like. All right now, if you'd like to, why don't you go ahead and season the cornmeal for me, as your taste is.
Pepper?
Yes,
I like pepper.
Fresh ground black pepper. It does make a meal.
There we are.
And do the same thing with the cayenne.
I don't know if I'm not sure how much I am.
I want you to be able to enjoy
There
your
we
food.
go, there we are.
All right, we're gonna mix that up. And we're gonna also season the fish as well.
Okay.
Yes, the same manner, pretty much the same manner. I like to season both the meal and the fish themselves. So again, we're gonna take some of that salt and we're gonna sprinkle that on there. And I don't believe in adding too much salt to most anything. As the Bible does say, we are the salt of the earth. And we do need salt. We are. Would you like to do the same thing with the pepper?
Pepper.
It's gonna be right nice there. Should we dare to put a pinch of the cayenne on it, or shall we leave well enough do? All right.
You know best.
We'll just do one side. How about that?
Okay.
We're gonna rub those spices in there nice and good. Are you visiting us from afar, sir?
Quite a ways.
Goodness gracious, you must be quite hungry. We'll try to make sure we get this on right fast and in your belly. All right then, making sure that is well coated. Now, do you have catfish where you come from?
Yes, we do, but we don't eat it very often.
You's fancy, huh? Now that we've gotten everything all ready to go, we're ready to fry everything on up.
Okay.
Oh my goodness. I just recalled I happen to have some fat back. Fat back gonna make this meal just perfect for you.
Sounds exciting.
Now I'm gonna add this beautiful fat back to the skillet, get it fried up all nice. It's nice and flavorful too. Pan's all nice and hot. Let's add the fish. Now that we done turned that fish, it's time for us to add our final ingredient for the meal.
Greens, right? Which kind of greens do we have here?
These turnip greens, sir.
Turnip greens.
Yes, Master Washington plants them all over the place, all of his acres. There's a field cover. They right abundant this time of year, and they taste so good. And you ain't even had to plant them off in your own personal garden.
And we just toss them right in on top?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Go ahead, right on. These look like they're about done now. Yeah, that's gonna be right nice.
The smell of this bacon, it is just filling this cabin. It smells so wonderful. I can't wait to try this. Just walking out, I could smell this as I was walking. This looks tremendous, and it's got some heavenly smells. I can't wait to try this.
Well, I'm excited for you to try what you have helped prepare. Now, have you ever eaten turnips before, sir?
Turnips. Undoubtedly, but I can't put my mind to it at the moment.
Well, let's put your mouth to it.
Whoa.
And you helped do that.
I do have to say, this truly is some of the very best fried fish I've had in a very long time.
That does my heart well, sir.
The spiciness of it, the saltiness of it is to perfection, to my perfection at least. I'm really enjoying this. It is not too spicy. I mean, you put in just the right amount. I was worried because I'm not a very big pepper person, but this is just right. Thank you so much for showing me this and feeding me this. It was so wonderful and so tasty.
You're quite welcome, sir. You are quite welcome.
And I want to thank you guys out there for joining us and really, truly encourage you to come to George Washington's Mount Vernon. An amazing site, amazing buildings, but even more, the interpreters that you'll find here, the trades that you're going to see here, the food that you're going to see cooked here when you come. There's so many things to see, so many things to experience, to smell. It is a great site if you're in the Northern Virginia area, or even if you're not, come to visit Mount Vernon. And I really want to thank you for coming along with us as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. Welcome. I'm John Townsend, and we're doing another special episode here at George Washington's Mount Vernon. Such a tremendous place, and this is another in a series that we're doing. If you haven't seen the earlier ones, go back and watch them. They'll help give you context for this episode. We're going to be making something special again with Deb Colburn. Come along as we experience this dish. It's going to be good. Hello, Deborah. I hope I'm not late.
No, John, not at all.
We've done fish, 3 different episodes of fish. Fish sounds like it was just amazingly important to what was going on.
Here at Mount Vernon, absolutely, it really was. It was not only a major staple for the population, both enslaved, hired, and the Washingtons themselves, but it was one of his major export businesses. So it's where the money's coming from a lot of the time.
Right. So what are we doing today, though?
Today, we're going to be working with another vitally important ingredient in our recipe. We're making fried hoe cakes, which are cornmeal pancakes.
Okay.
And that is Washington's second most important crop at Mount Vernon after his cash crop wheat. Because corn, and this is white cornmeal ground at the grist mill here, corn was being fed to the enslaved population as a major ration. Each working hand is getting an entire quart of cornmeal daily.
So it's like their bread ration.
Days out of the year. Absolutely right. That's exactly right. And so we're starting with the white cornmeal and water and a little cayenne pepper, because we already talked about how much that is plentiful, and it's something we know that they had a taste for, and it's going to kind of liven up those hoe cakes. You know, you can do it without, but why do it without when you can add the spice, right?
Okay, sure. So hoe cakes were probably one of the simplest things they were normally cooking, right?
Absolutely, especially for the slaves. There are more elaborate recipes using cornmeal and to make hoe cakes for, say, the Washington's table, but for the slaves, you're looking at simply adding your meal, your water, and your spices, and you're just going to get it to a pancake batter consistency. So I'm going to start with probably the equivalent of about 5 cups or so of
but it's all just
cornmeal.
A ratio anyway,
but it's a
right?
ratio. I mean, I'll be honest, other than weighing things from time to time, it's rare that I measure. I just kind of go by feel.
Sure.
So I'm going to add to the cornmeal a little bit of that spice we talked about, that cayenne pepper. Spice them up a little bit. And a little bit of salt. Get that all mixed in. And then we just add water. Now this is warm water.
Yeah.
And you know, so basically any water that they would have been able to warm up by their fire before they added it in. The warm water helps the cornmeal to rise up a little bit in the skillet. But once we get this into a pancake consistency.
So you want it pretty thin.
Yeah, it's going to be ready to put in the skillet. And so this would have been a wonderful thing for the slaves to prepare for themselves, quick and easy, first thing in the morning in the dark, because they're supposed to be in the fields by sunrise, or any of their other occupational locations, depending on what they were doing for the Washingtons. And you know, there's some conceptions that, and they're misconceptions, that hoe cakes were cooked on hoes out in fields. That's not where they get that that term. There were griddles that resembled hoes.
Okay.
And so that's where that terminology is coming from. But you know, you wouldn't want an open fire in your field.
I don't think so.
No, no gentleman farmer would condone that, and Washington certainly wouldn't have. So that's pretty much.
There we go, a nice thin batter.
Look at that. Ready for the skillet.
Okay. So.
Okay, we're gonna start with our lard. Now that we've got our preheated skillet and our hot cooking coals underneath. All right, now you can pretty much just ladle in
Okay.
about the amount that you would use. So just like pancakes, they've got to sizzle up on the bottom and start to bubble a bit on top before we want to flip them.
So these guys are ready?
Yep.
You flipped them over and they look good.
They do. So now we're gonna go ahead and take them on out
Okay.
into our bowl. Hoe cakes.
Okay.
Cornmeal pancakes.
Let's take them to the table.
Sounds like a plan.
These hoe cakes, they look special. I don't know if I've ever had hoe cakes with pepper in them before.
Okay, so it's because it's a corn. Think of some, a southwestern tradition. Same kind of
sure.
idea,
Okay.
except here being brought up by the enslaved population from West Indies exposure,
Right.
and of course Washington's growing them too. But try one.
Okay,
Now,
okay.
They are not meant to stand on their own.
Right.
You'd
They're
be eating
accompaniment.
them with something else. So be kind.
No. Bread is, bread can be very, very plain. And we eat it all the time. We like it. It's wonderful. This is like a bread, right? Mm-hmm. So it's meant to go with other things. We could probably put stuff on it if we wanted to.
We could. You could have it with a soup or a stew.
Have it with the soup or the stew
Uh-huh.
as an accompaniment, as a change in texture. They taste great. There's almost no ingredients here.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it?
I mean, you stir some water in and you got a little bit of seasoning and that's it. And salt, right?
And salt.
That's
yeah.
it.
Yeah, that's it.
The flavor is wonderful.
Well, I'm glad that you
The
like it.
texture is great.
And now it's a little deceiving because we call them hoe cakes, and we kind of liken them to pancakes, but they're not light and airy like
No.
pancakes. They're denser like bread, as
Right.
you pointed out.
There's
Yeah.
no real leavening other than what the ground things kind of bring along with them, which is fine. This is such an important part of what's going on in the diet in the 18th century, and it connects with these other things going on in other cultures too. Oat cakes that are happening with the Scots, and but we take those traditions and we come to America and we've got corn.
Yep.
And what are we going to make? Well, the same thing, corn cakes.
That's right.
So they're wonderful. Thank you for telling us all about this and making them for us. And they taste so wonderful, and they're so fun to watch and experiment and understand just how simple they are. And that anyone can do them. At home, you can make these.
Absolutely.
So simple.
So simple,
So
John.
wonderful. I want to thank everyone, and I specifically want to thank Deborah here and all the folks at Mount Vernon. They have just been so kind and so welcoming to us. And, it's so exciting to connect with these different historic sites, Mount Vernon especially. If you're ever in this area, Northern Virginia, this is a tremendous resource, a national resource. We need to be using this. We need to be understanding it. We need to be experiencing it. I call you to do that whenever you have the opportunity and to tell other people. And I want to thank you for coming along on this video, experiencing this with us as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. Hi, I want to welcome you to another very special episode of this episode that we're doing here at George and Martha Washington's Mount Vernon. And you can see this is an amazing site behind me, and there's so many wonderful things to see. Even in George and Martha's day, this site was visited constantly, and they had all these different visitors, and they had to entertain them. And so the dish we're doing today is something that might well have ended up on the entertaining tables of George and Martha Washington. Thanks for joining us. Come along, let's experience this one. Hello, Deb. I'm here again with Deb Colburn, and we're going to be doing another fish dish. And what have we got today?
Okay, well today we have a fish dish that would have been served at the Washington's table as a typical second course after the soup. And we're dressing a salt cod.
A salt cod. So they don't mean salt from, the cod's salty from the ocean, but he's been preserved,
He
right?
has been preserved, and this is a piece of salt cod.
Salt cod. So it's kind of like leather. It's not very thick. Now, earlier we talked about salt shad.
That's right.
So the shad would have been a similar kind of fish, right? But not the same.
No.
This is from the ocean. This would have been imported?
Yes, locally. I mean, not imported from across the ocean. Obviously, there's cod fishing happening a little further north, and so
Okay.
that's going to be coming in as a delicacy for the Washingtons.
So the northern colonies are going to be bringing salt cod down in, and it's coming to their table. Interesting. So I mean, you wouldn't today we would think this would be maybe something that would be a lower class food, but apparently not.
No, less bony than the shad,
Uh-huh.
and so and the fact that it is coming from elsewhere,
Just that fact alone.
there's a little bit of status there going on.
How do we take this salty slab of kind of leathery fish
Jerky.
and fish jerky and turn it into something that's going to be yummy for the table, especially at a big house like that?
Okay, well, ironically, it's going to be the same type of process as the slaves would have rehydrated their salt shad.
Okay.
It's going to be putting it in water overnight,
Okay.
but the Washingtons are going to have the luxury, or I should say the Washingtons cooks, Lucy and Nathan, are going to have the luxury of being able to add some vinegar.
So how much vinegar?
Basically, it's recommended by Hannah Glass, a glassful.
So we have no idea whatsoever.
exactly.
We don't know how much water in the first place or how much. So some.
Some. And so what I tend to do is I make sure it's covered, because if it's not completely covered with the water, then the areas it's not covered
Right,
are not
it's
going to
just not
soften
gonna-
up or
right.
work on it. And then after I've covered it, then this is about a cup and a quarter, and
Right.
that's whatever. So
Right.
I throw that in and let it do its work, and then usually switch it out the next morning before I'm ready to work with it, and then start to pull it apart, because I am going to be looking for that later after we've boiled it. But then that's the next step. It's going to go in boiling water.
Are we looking for it to puff up a little bit maybe? Is it going to expand?
Yeah, and it already has expanded some. You can see, and you can even feel the difference between.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we got some real flexibility.
Yeah.
Have you changed the water any? Do you do that too?
I did. I changed it this morning,
Okay.
and so it's been sitting in fresh water and vinegar for the last hour or two.
There's obviously sometimes you just see it with just water, sometimes this vinegar. Does the vinegar is adding flavor to it? Or what do you think?
I think that the vinegar is helping to dispel the salt taste. It's diffusing.
Giving it something different.
Yeah.
Differentiate a little.
Differentiate a little bit,
Okay.
and it's going to help boil it off in the water better, I think.
Okay.
Those are my theories.
We're not sure exactly what it's
No,
doing, but that's what they did, so we know it's the right thing, right?
That's right. That's right. So we're going to get them into our boiling water.
So we have a roiling boil here.
Rolling boil. Yep, that's exactly right. I like to pull them apart as
Okay.
much as I can before they go in, because it's only going to help them boil up that much faster.
Okay. So kind of in strips.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the idea is that as this boils, they're going to get to the point where that catfish did when we were making that catfish stew.
Okay.
Nice and flaky.
Right, and kind of so it's going to puff up a little bit in here, and wonderful.
Yeah, sure is.
The lid goes on. How long is this going to cook?
Well, we're gonna, you know how it is with a watch
I know,
pot.
Exactly how it
So I'll probably check it. We can check it again in about 20 minutes.
is. Okay. What are we doing next?
Okay, well, the next step is to make the egg sauce that we're going to dress the cod with. And the way that's done is you're going to boil 4 eggs.
Okay.
And after you've boiled the 4 eggs, you're going to cut them in half, extract the yolks. Now, this is all according to Hannah Glass's instructions. She definitely had a specific order in which she wanted it to be done, because you're chopping the egg whites up first, not as fine as you will be when you add the yolks back in. You'll be chopping them less fine, because they have a tendency to just completely disintegrate, I think
Yes, they do.
the main reason behind that. So, coarsely chopped is the way she describes it. So we're just going to do a little bit, not terribly fine or small.
Well, these are all chopped up nice and roughly. What do you want me to do
Okay,
here?
I want you to bring the melted butter
Okay.
over.
This has been melting for quite a while.
Yes, yes, and that is good because it's already got a nice heat going, which is what we want. All the eggs are going into this, and then we're going to boil it. All right.
So this looks like it's almost more egg than it is butter.
It called for half a pound of butter, and that's what we're using.
Gentle stir? We don't want to break this up, or?
Just a gentle one.
Okay.
It's going to break up enough on its own, I think, that it'll do
Okay.
what it's supposed to do. But it's just, you know, egg and butter, and that's the sauce for dressing the cod.
Interesting.
And while you're stirring that, I'm going to go ahead and,
Yeah, that's still boiling away.
it sure is, and check on our consistency and see how we're doing. I think this still needs to get a little more tender. So while you're stirring that up into a boil, we're going to let this keep doing its thing.
And we want this to actually get to a boil.
According to Hannah Glass.
Okay, how long do you think?
Probably about the same time it's going to take the fish to finish softening.
So maybe 20 minutes or?
Yeah, at the most, at the most.
Eggs boiled in oil. This has been boiling up a little bit, and whoa, it's suddenly changed into something else.
It has. It's started to solidify and mesh. So we see instead of the separation of the egg and the butter, it's more of a sauce consistency.
So is this ready to come off the fire?
Let's take it off.
Okay, I'll put this down there for you.
Thank you so much.
There's that. And this egg sauce is very nice and hot.
Okay, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reach in, get our nice flaky salt cod. It's starting to fall apart there as it's boiled.
So not too much farther then, eh?
No.
Okay.
And we're gonna lay this out. And according to Hannah Glass, as soon as you get your fish laid on your plate the way in which you want to cover it with its sauce, and then sent to table hot. And if you are concerned that it's going to cool down too much before it's eaten, she suggests a water dish, which is an 18th century chafing dish.
Right, something. So you want to keep it with its heat right away, keep it right up to temperature.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So the dressing of a salt cod with the egg and butter sauce.
Here we go.
And there it is.
It doesn't look like anything I would have expected off the top of my head, and even if I was reading it in the cookbook. So, very interesting. Can't wait to try it. I guess we better send it up to the table while it's still hot.
I think so.
Well, let's try this while it's still hot.
Okay, John. A little fish, a little egg.
Okay. Definitely a different egg texture than, or a fish texture than you're used to. We're used to, I guess, you know, frozen fish or fresh fish. This has got a lot more body to it.
It does. The fresh fish has a fishier taste too, don't you think?
Yeah. Well, I think with all that soaking, we've lost some of that fishiness. And it's not overly salty though. For being a salt fish, yeah, it hardly has any, you know, it's not too salty at all. And I'm trying to identify this egg sauce. I was worried about it.
Okay.
Because egg sauce doesn't sound like something, you know, I'm all excited about. This one is not, it is actually very, very good. Buttery, it has some texture with the egg in it. I'm enjoying this a lot.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. Well, and maybe that texture is due to why Hannah Glass is so specific about the order in which you chop the eggs.
Right.
Because it's the way it's going to break down with the butter in the sauce. That if we chop one thing too fine or not enough, then she certainly.
Right. It still has, yeah, it still has the texture of the white, but the yolk is pretty much, you know, broken up and gone into the butter. This has been an amazing one. It really has answered some questions about what's going on here with the saltfish and how we were going to use it, especially in a context where it's in a fancier household instead of in a different kind of a setting. We've only ever used, I think, saltfish in the fish balls before, where you break it up. But this is a really interesting way of cooking it, and really pretty simple. Not difficult at all. Now, not necessarily easy to get salt cod these days.
True.
But in the time period, it would have been very, very common.
Very true.
Thank you. Thank you for this amazing recipe and the chance to get to truly try it out. It's one thing to read it in a cookbook. It's another one to actually get in there and start boiling this fish up and making up this really, really interesting sauce, which I just did not have any idea what it was going to turn into. So thank you so much for bringing us this amazing recipe. And we are here at George Washington's Mount Vernon, an amazing site, so much to see, so many things that are happening, buildings. You know, here we are on the Pioneer Farm. There's the mansion up there and the tour and all these things, all these amazing interpreters. If you get a chance to, if you're in this Northern Virginia area, come and visit. The site is wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. Hi, I'm John Townsend, and this is the final episode here at George Washington's Mount Vernon. And it has been it's been a grueling couple of days. We have had so much fun. The experiences are incredible here. A great set of people. The site is amazing, and these wonderful people to interact with. We've had so much fun. I can't wait to bring you this next episode. I really want to thank you for coming along with us on this particular set of videos, because they really tie together and they're a lot of fun. I've saved probably the yummiest for last here. We're going to go and find out about this wonderful 18th century dessert. Come along. Hello, Deborah.
Good morning, John.
I am so excited for this final episode, this final cooking episode we're doing, and it has been such an amazingly wonderful time. We've had a lot of fun here. The hospitality has been, you've been so kind, and with these wonderful dishes and telling us all these things. So I'm truly excited. You're obviously working on something. What are we doing this morning?
Well, I thought it was fitting, since it was our last episode, to do a dessert.
Okay.
So we're doing an orange fool, which would have been a dessert for the Washingtons.
So something fancy.
Yes, sir.
I'm ready for something fancy.
Absolutely. Well, we've been so patient and generous in learning about all the different types of food that was prepared here on the state. But you are an honored guest, so we are going to treat you with the hospitality that the Washingtons would have wanted.
And an orange fool, that sounds like fun. What's going on with an orange fool? Where'd this one come from?
Okay, so this comes from Hannah Glass, The Art of Cookery. It's also, we find it in Martha Washington's, the cookbook we attribute to being Martha's own, in her own hand.
Okay.
So, you know, taking favorite recipes from already published cookbooks and putting them into our own, just like we all do at home.
Right.
Yeah. And
everyone should.
Everyone should. Exactly. So what we've got in an orange fool are eggs, and we have heavy cream, lovely cream. We have the juice from 6 oranges, a little nutmeg, a little cinnamon, and about a 1/4 pound of sugar, which sounds like a ton, but it's really about a 1/2 cup. So it's not exorbitantly sweet. It's a lovely, lovely little custard, basically, that we're making.
Now, you're using sugar in this thing. It might sound very, very sweet, but you said oranges. What do you have in here again?
I have the juice from 6 oranges in my pipkin here.
What does the recipe say about the oranges?
Well, Hannah Glass is specific that they should be from Seville.
Okay.
Seville, Spain, and those are not sweet oranges.
Okay, so they're bitter oranges, not the same we're used to today.
That's right, that's correct, which could explain the addition of the sugar.
So maybe when we do it, we might cut back on that, depending on our palate. And of course, today we like things sweet anyway, so you know, we might leave in the same amount anyway. Wonderful. Well, how do we begin the preparation for this?
Okay, well, we're going to start with beating 6 eggs. And while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and add the cream and the juice from 6 oranges. We'll put in our nutmeg, our cinnamon, our sugar, and now we can go ahead and put the beaten eggs in.
Okay.
Yeah, that'll work. So then we're just going to stir this all up together.
Okay.
And get that nice and mixed in until we're really making a custard-like.
Yeah.
Yeah. Once that's good and mixed up, it's ready to go on a slow fire.
We obviously had to cook this, apparently.
We do, because we got the raw eggs, and so we need to get those all cooked up nicely with the rest of the ingredients. So we're going to be putting it over the brazier here.
Okay.
And I'm going to pick the coolest spot I can find because we want a slow fire, according to Hannah Glass.
Right.
And that's mainly because you don't want all of those eggs and cream to curdle while you're cooking it up so nice and slow. So this is the time-consuming part of this very simple dessert.
You can't rush this.
Can't.
What's your estimate for the amount of time we're going to have to sit here and stir this?
About 40 to 45 minutes.
Okay, well, it's like so many of these other things. It takes a while, but I'll bet it'll be worth it.
I hope so. I hope you think so.
This is actually thickening up very nicely. It has not taken as long as we expected. So we've got it off the fire. It's starting to cool. What's next?
Okay, because it's nice and thick now. It's thickened up. We're going to go ahead and add the very specific reference that Hannah Glass puts in for how much butter, which is a small amount of butter.
A small amount of butter, okay.
So there it goes. And based on 18th century usual recipes, you know, I think it's about a tablespoon of butter. And so now we're just, because it's still naturally hot because we just took it off the fire, it's melting the butter into there. And then we, guess what, John? We stir until it's cool.
Well, it looks like it's going to take about an hour. Cool off.
Well,
you sure there isn't a way to speed this up a little bit?
Well, absolutely. There'd be ways that you could speed it up. You can put it, sink the whole container into some cold water, or like the Washingtons had the luxury of ice. So you perhaps
speed
it up that way by cooling down the container a little faster.
Now that would be wasteful, I think, in the 18th
Definitely.
century.
It would be extravagant for them to use ice in that manner. But depending on how prestigious the guests were and how things were going
But they
in
had
the
time.
kitchen.
They would have had time to earlier do so.
Yeah.
They could take their
absolutely.
time, let it cool off normally.
Sure. But you got to keep stirring it while it's cooling.
Okay.
That's another specific Hannah Glass instruction. Keep
stirring. Just keep stirring. Well, it looks like it's cooled off. What do you think?
I think we're
Is it
ready to pour.
It goes into the glasses?
It does.
I'm going to let you pour them because if I did it, it would be all over the place.
Okay, I'll take it on. Here we go. Fit for the Washingtons.
Wonderful. Does it get a little maybe nutmeg up on top?
We could certainly do that. Absolutely, John. I like the way you think.
So do these set a little bit longer, or are these ready to send up to the table now?
I think traditionally they would have set just a little bit in their glass to give them a little, time.
They'll get some body.
Exactly, give them some body, and then yes, served to the table with a degree of elegance and fineness that the Washingtons were renowned for.
Okay. Well, the orange fools look wonderful. They've set up, and it looks like they're ready for us to partake of them.
In your honor, John.
In my honor?
In your honor. This is our final tasting together
there we go.
Out of this series.
Wonderful. Let's see what we've got here.
All right.
Yes. Nice, and actually didn't turn out too sweet at all.
And it could have, as you pointed out, because I did not use Seville oranges for the juice, so it would be even perhaps a little tartar.
Yes, and maybe a little stronger of an orange flavor. This is not terribly orangey flavored.
No.
It's just a very nice custard, really, is what it...
I like it too.
Yeah. And of course, maybe a little more nutmeg in there if it was me, but it's really good. Really very good. I can imagine coming at the end of the meal, a very special evening, and out comes the orange fool.
Almost like a sherbet, the way we do today, to soothe the palate and calm the tummy a little bit.
Yes, after eating all these wonderful dishes that they would have had, undoubtedly, just dish
Hours.
after dish. Yes, hours, long meals, and then
This
this
would be
little perfect meat ender.
Yeah, absolutely.
This has been just really the most tremendous trip. We have had such fun with all the folks here. the hospitality, the location. This time of year, it's springtime and things are just starting to pop around here. It's beautiful. And we're so excited to be able to come and connect, interact with everyone that's here and see all the different kinds of programs that are going on, the different kinds of things they do here, whether it's an historic building or it's people doing trades, people doing interpretive things with characters in first person. It's really, I mean, most sites don't have this many different kinds of things going on, and it's a large site. It's an important site historically. Truly an amazing site to come and visit. Again, I've said in the past episodes, if you're in the area, and I really mean it, if you are in the area, you've got to come and visit this site. There are other sites in the area. This is probably the premier one you have to come to first, and then you can come see these other ones. They're also tremendous sites in the area. So make sure to come out, see George Washington's Mount Vernon. He welcomes you to come to this site. And I really want to thank Deb here for all the amazing work she has done prepping all these things in the evening. There's long hours getting all these things ready, and she's done a tremendous job bringing these things to us and all the afterwork. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're so welcome, John. It has been truly our pleasure.
I want to thank you for coming along with us as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century.
We've got a special episode today. We are back in the kitchen and we'll be doing a German recipe from the 18th century called cooked pastry. Thanks for joining us today. Many folks are asking us about different cultural recipes for the 18th century, Germany or Dutch recipes. Those are both asked for, and we just luckily ran into some folks at a recent conference. We were at a Living History Museum conference out in New York State. We ran into some folks from Old Salem. Karen Absher, Kayla Kavanaugh. They're working on translating a couple of German cookbooks. Cookbooks that likely would have been in the Moravian community there in North Carolina. And so they are translating some of these recipes. They gave us this cookbook. It looks like a lot of fun. So hopefully we'll be able to go there someday soon. It's such a great site. I've been there but many years in the past. So I'd love to go and visit Old Salem. Today's recipe is a cooked pastry. And you can use this in many different ways. The particular recipe we'll be using it today, well, let me just say, it's going to be really good, so let's get started. This recipe comes out of the Economical Handbook for the Housewife. It was printed in Stuttgart in 1795. This recipe for this cooked pastry is very, very similar to a modern French choux pastry, minus just a couple of tiny little changes, but it's right out of this cookbook. Really, it's very simple, but it's versatile. We can use this pastry for several different things depending on the consistency. If we make it stiff, we can use it and make sort of a puff pastry. If we use it in the way we're going to do it today, it'll be more of a batter, and we can use it for a funnel cake or for, well, what we're going to be doing later on. Let's get started making this up. So we're going to start off with some flour. This is just plain unbleached flour. We've got a little less than a cup here, and we are shrinking this recipe. It's probably half of what is in the book because we don't want to make a giant tub of this stuff. But we've got a cup or so of our unbleached flour, and we're going to be mixing this right in our cooking vessel. And now I've got just some plain regular milk. We've got a little bit more than a cup here. Again, we're making this a little bit looser, more of a batter mixture, so we have a little bit more milk than flour. The other thing about this recipe is the ratios, the ingredients. Again, like most of these recipes from the 18th century, it isn't precise. Whisk this up a little bit and get this good and mixed. And now we are going to add some butter here. This is probably about 8 ounces of butter. We don't need all of this. We're gonna work with about 4 ounces of this butter, about a half of a stick that we're used to here in North America. I'm not gonna bother to whisk this up because this is gonna go on a low fire and we're gonna start heating this up, getting it up to a simmer, and it'll start to thicken. So let's get this on the fire.
Well, we got the fire going already, and what's going to happen is this is going to start thickening up right away. This is probably already not something for a whisk. Let's go straight to a spoon and start to fold this in. As it starts to simmer, as it starts to get really warm, it should thicken right up. You want to make sure to continue stirring the entire time. You don't want it to burn, you don't want it to stick, and you don't want it to get lumpy.
So when this stuff starts to thicken up, it thickens up in a hurry. It went so fast we couldn't catch it on the camera. So watch it. You want to make sure to continue to stir it the whole time though, so you get a very, very consistent batter here, or lump as we get in the end. So this is good and really thickened up. The next stage is to actually get some eggs into these. So let me set this aside. It's gonna stay warm for us. Let me get some eggs and get them mixed up here. I've got 6 eggs in here. I'm gonna get them whisked up so that we can start to mix in here. Now we may not need all 6 of these eggs, but I wanna have enough. Our eggs are whisked up. Let me set these aside. Let's bring our dough back in here. This is gonna be a challenge. I don't wanna mix all these in. I wanna try to get to the right consistency. This is all about not precision measuring, but precision consistency, right? So we're just gonna add in about half these eggs and start going. So this is looking like a real mess, right? It looks like it's never going to mix in properly, but we just have to keep at this. This will mix in eventually. If you've got a mixer, this will actually work a lot faster, but we're just gonna keep working at this. So as you can see, it's starting to mix in here. It did not take that long. It wasn't that crazy. And we've got a nice kind of a thick batter here. If we were making this into a certain sort of pastry that we would bake in the oven, we're already gotten too thin. But for what we want, it's still a little too thick. So I'm gonna add a little bit more of our eggs. And I'm just gonna continue to stir this up until it gets silky smooth, then it'll be ready. Okay, so this smoothed right out for us. This particular pastry or cooked pastry is ready to go. Now, what are we gonna cook with it? What are we gonna do with it? We could possibly just cook it right into our hot fat, and we could make something like a funnel cake. Maybe we'd cover it up with sugar or something else, but we're gonna do something else a little more special with this that's particular to this particular recipe book, and that is we're going to take homemade cooked bratwurst. You definitely want to make sure the bratwurst is already cooked for this particular recipe because the heat isn't going to get all the way and penetrate to it's not going to cook this bratwurst. So we've got some cooked bratwurst, and as the recipe says, we're going to slice these guys up. They're nice and long, so I'll slice them up in half and then in half again, so we have sort of 4 pieces for each one of these, and they divide up nicely. I'm just going to toss them right into our pot. Let's take these over to the fire.
Our fat is nice and hot over the fire here, hopefully not too hot. We're using just very standard old lard here. And I'm just gonna take this, and it's very well coated, you can see this, and just put them right in there. Let me try just 1 or 2 to start with. See how they go. Well, as you can see, these guys have turned out and they look wonderful. And of course, they smell wonderful, and I'm sure this bratwurst is gonna be really good. Let's give them a try. They really kind of puffed up nicely, and they really have a great look to them. Incredible, great, wonderful flavor. Of course, we've got this wonderful bratwurst in the middle. You can't go wrong. But we have this great, a complementary pastry that's cooked around it. And it's not a sweet pastry. It is a sweet, savory pastry in this circumstance. It doesn't have sugar in it or anything like that. So it really covers this and it works really well. But there's, I mean, if you think about it, we could do so many different things with this batter. And some of the recipes talk about these other things that we could put with it. Sometimes we just take this batter and apparently you rolled it in things. If it's a little bit thicker, you could roll it in breadcrumbs and fry it like that. Or you could roll it in, say, the boiled eggs that have been crumbled up. And I think of something like, what happens if instead of bratwurst, we took cheese and we put it and then we coated it and fried that in there. Whoa, that would be a great kind of take on this same concept. So we could even do this with fruits, and the cookbooks even mention something like elderberry, but we could probably use other kinds of fruits and sweeten this up and maybe put sprinkled sugar on top at the same time. So it's a very versatile kind of batter or dough, and you can do a lot of different things with it. And this is, hey, it's right out of the 18th century and probably quite typical of something that you would find in a German-influenced culture household right here in North America. So I really want to thank the folks at Old Salem and the fantastic translation work they're working on right now to bring some of this available to those folks that don't have all the knowledge of, understanding the 18th century German cookbooks. So it is great to have folks that are working on those kinds of things. So I really want to encourage them, thank them so much for making this kind of thing available to us so that we can interpret it and understand it and try it out. Definitely a wonderful, this is really one of those great ones. Everyone here is kind of trying to decide whether this is one of the very best ones we've ever done. So it's a great one. I really want you to try this one out. It is not terribly complicated at all, really very few ingredients. All these things are available and you can easily cook this at home. It is a great one, a good one to try out. Also, if you're in that North Carolina area, that's the Winston-Salem, North Carolina area, Old Salem, the historic site there, a tremendous site. There's a lot of great buildings and so much research, wonderful people there. So make sure to check that out if you're in that area or you're going to that area. I highly encourage you to check that out. I want to thank you so much for coming along with us today, trying out these new things, testing them out. We're experimenting. We're savoring the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. So this one's going to be interesting. It's a baked apple pudding from, let's say, 1794. Maximilian Hazelmore with his domestic economy. This one's going to be good. Thanks for joining us today. So this recipe in the cookbook is called a baked apple pudding. But if I was going to put it in today's parlance, we would probably call it a apple custard pie. But maybe that would be a better term that we would understand. And really, there's some kind of interesting things in it. One of the strange things is the amount of butter. This thing's got a massive quantity of butter in it. We didn't think it was going to work out, but I think it actually seems to work out pretty good. First up for ingredients, we've got the flesh of 2 large apples. This has already been peeled and cored and then chopped up. The next ingredient we've got here is lemons. This calls for the rind of 2 lemons that have been shredded. So we're going to talk about that, how these work out a little bit later. We've got sugar. We've got a whole cup of sugar. We've got 6 eggs. You're going to need 6 eggs here and the butter. We've got a full 8 ounces of butter. More butter. So let's talk about the lemon part of this. Now remember this, as ingredients, it called for the rind of 2 lemons. And then the instructions are pretty specific. You're supposed to, take off the rind and then shred it. And then he calls for boiling this rind in water, changing the water twice. Now, we did that, and what we're left, if you boil this and change the water twice, is there's very little sort of flavor here. It's very, very, very mild. And I'm actually wondering whether in the time period, the lemons that they had were either bitter lemons or lemons with much stronger flavor inside the rind than, say, lemons today. Because this is too much. Changing the water twice for this lemon rind just drives every little bit out. Now, he probably had us boil this rind to not turn this into a lemon pie. Because if we just, put the zest straight in, that's gonna probably bring in too much flavor. So maybe with modern lemons to kind of strike somewhere in the middle, maybe we should take these shredded lemon rind and maybe boil them just up just bring them into, simmer them just up to boiling and then stop. Don't change the water twice or there's just not enough lemon left. So very first step, we got to get these apples all soft. So let's put them in boiling water. We're going to boil these up for about 25 minutes to get these really soft. Okay, these apples are ready. And we're just we've already strained the water out of them. We want to mash these up. We want to get them nice and fine. Okay, so these look good and mashed up. And in goes the butter. We're going to put in the entire quantity of butter here, a whole 8 ounces. I'm just going to use the masher to kind of mix it in here. Now we've got our 6 eggs. Let's get these cracked open. These are whole eggs. We don't have to worry about separating them. There are 6 eggs, and we're just going to get these whisked up. Now it's time for our cup of sugar and whisk it in to our eggs. And in goes the rind of shredded up of our lemons. They might kind of clump up on you, but try to keep them separate. These, basically we've got all the ingredients together. Now all we have to do is put our eggs with our apples. Now again, these have cooled down enough so they're not going to be cooking our eggs. And we're just gonna bring all these 2 things together. And this does sort of remind us about the Amelia Simmons pumpkin pie recipe or pumpkin pudding recipe, where it was so liquidy. We just kind of poured it into the pie pan. We thought it would never solidify up, but it turned out just fine. This one, again, is a very loose mixture, but it's all mixed up here. Really, the only thing it's missing is nutmeg. But he didn't have it in the recipe, so I guess we're gonna skip that. Our mixture is ready to go into our pie here, or a pie plate. And we just got a standard short paste in here for the pie. Very, very simple. And we could just pour our mixture in almost right up to the top of our pie plate. Looks really good. This is gonna go into the oven at 350 degrees for maybe 45 minutes or so, or until the top looks nice and golden brown. And make sure you use a cookie sheet or a pan underneath. You don't want this, bubbling out and smoking up your oven and in your kitchen. Here's our baked apple pudding, Maximilian Hazelmore. It looks tremendous. It turned out really well. The question is, what does this really taste like? Whoa, Fabulous flavors. And really nice and sweet. Definitely that custardy, texture really fills in on this, gives us, and we get that sort of lemon overtone at the very end, or lemon flavor at the very end. And this was the lemon that we used in this particular pie was the one that we did the double boiling on. And remember, I talked about maybe not doing that as much. I think I'm going to go back on that and actually say go ahead and follow the directions and change the water twice. Because, here I thought we were going to lose all that lemon flavor, but I think it actually came back when it was baked in the pie. And it's a subtle note there that doesn't overpower this pie. It doesn't turn it into a lemon pie, definitely. Even with that double boiling, but the lemon note is still there at the end, and it gives it a little bit of crispness that it might not have otherwise. So I am definitely going to suggest you follow these directions exactly like it said. forget what I said earlier. The taste is wonderful. The texture is really good, and it's a beautiful looking pie. Right here from the late 18th century. Again, one of these that you really have to try. One of these recipes right out of time. We're just pulling it right, 220 years later, still excellent. So give this one a try. Definitely in your kitchen at home or in your historical kitchen, this one is a good one. So I really want to thank you for coming along as we experimented on this one, as we're trying these things out. Sometimes you never know how they're going to turn out. So thanks for coming along as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. Peaches, it's that time of year, and yes, peaches were popular in the 18th century. Today we're doing a peach tart. This is from a 1787 cookbook called Cookery and Pastry by Susanna MacGyver. Thanks for joining us today. So peaches are a bit of an interesting story. They certainly had peaches, especially in England in the 18th century, and you hear them talked about having peach trees in North America in the 18th century, so they're popular. Nectarines they had, in fact, they seem to be earlier than peaches. They also had things like apricots all the time. Most of the time in the recipe books, though, when you see peaches, you see them in preservation techniques. They're always preserving them, putting them in vinegar or sugaring them, all these different ways of preserving peaches. One of the interesting things about this particular recipe, though, is that it's to be used right away, right? Peaches that aren't preserved. And just like today, peaches in the 18th century, they were very, very seasonal. I mean, boy, they are only good for just this very small window, and then they're no good anymore, right? So this recipe actually calls for the peaches to be used in the slightly before ripe context. So this is very different than most of the peach recipes you find in 18th century cookbooks. Okay, now I'm going to confess to you, this is a complete experiment. This particular recipe, we have not done it before, and it maybe is a little tricky. The thing is, though, it's really, really simple, at least ingredient-wise. We have puff paste because it's like a pie tart thing, but it's got peaches and it's got sugar, and that's it. There is nothing else that's called for in this recipe. So it is amazingly simple, but we're not sure exactly how it's going to work out because the instructions, maybe I wouldn't do it this way, or maybe you wouldn't do it this way, but we're going to follow the instructions. We've got a pan here over very, very low heat. And what we're going to do is bring in some sugar. I've got sugar, maybe 1.5 cups of sugar. We're going to put this over the fire right in our pan, really, really low heat. Next up, we have our peaches. We've already got our peaches peeled, obviously, and have them quartered up. I've got 4 peaches here, and I'm going to make sure that they're drained and just put them right into our sugar. Okay, now we're just going to stir these up. I guess if it was, let's say, another kind of recipe completely, it was meat or something, I would call this maybe a ragu, the way that this was going to turn out. Okay, so we've been stirring this up. The moisture really came out of these peaches, and it's made this wonderful thick syrup. I've definitely kept this on sort of medium-low heat here and kept it stirring so it doesn't burn. After about 20-25 minutes, they're starting to soften up just a touch. I think it's ready. She doesn't actually tell us exactly how long to do this or even at what state to stop at, but I'm guessing that we're probably at a good spot. They've changed. They're a little bit more translucent than they were, but they're not so soft they're going to break up at all. So let's get these off the fire and get them to start to cool. Well, our peaches have cooled off and we're ready for the next stage. We're going to put these peaches into our tart tin. You could probably use a pie plate if you want, but this will probably cook a little bit faster. Gonna fill it up to about 3/4 the way full, not too much. Let's get these arranged so that they're kind of flat in here. I guess I'm just gonna line it 1 deep with these pieces. Top it off with a little bit more of the syrup. That looks really good. And let's go ahead and really, it doesn't take any puff paste in the bottom, but it does on the top. So there we go. And we're just gonna punch this down, cut off our excess, There we go. This looks pretty good now. There's no way this is going to seal up perfectly. This will undoubtedly kind of spill out in your oven, so make sure to have a cookie sheet underneath this thing or you're not going to be happy because it'll make a mess. And we're going to cook it 45 minutes to an hour until this puff paste looks good and cooked and nice, brown colored at probably, this typical 350 degrees. Well, our peach tart came out of the oven. It smells wonderful. Kind of had to bust out a chunk here and serve it up because obviously it isn't like a pie. I mean, this really isn't meant to be served like that. It's kind of, in fact, the original recipe talks about cooking it in little petty pans. So maybe it was intended to be sort of single serving little dishes. And the puff paste kind of pulled up and kind of shrank down a little bit and it fought the pan. Maybe we should have left it kind of drape over the top. Maybe with the petty pans that would work even better. But this looks great, smells wonderful. Let's give it a try. Wow, ooh, ooh, what? That is so sugary. Whoa, this is sweet, sweet, sweet. So maybe we didn't need quite so much sugar. Maybe, she originally calls for unripe peaches, so maybe that would help too. A lot of moisture came out of these peaches. It came out with just a tremendous quantity of liquid, which we were concerned we weren't going to have enough. Well, we don't. There's no need to worry about that. So tremendous flavor, wonderful. Again, this was an experiment. A lot of these ones you just have to try it to see how it's going to work out. I wasn't sure how those, those peaches in the pan with the sugar was going to work out. That worked out all right. Tremendous. Whew, excellent. I really want to, try. Thank you for coming along on this experimental one. They're all experiments in one way or another. This one's got some a really fun one to try though. And you don't necessarily see these recipes where they're using peaches that are either unripe or ready to go. So this is one that's a little bit different than most of them. Just amazing though. Thank you for coming along as we experiment, as we try these things out, as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century.